Okay, welcome everybody to this meeting of the Leicestershire Health and Wellbeing Board. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ewan Walters. I work in Democratic Services here at the County Council. I'm standing in for my colleague Matt Hand, who normally looks after these meetings. So this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and it's going out on YouTube live at the moment, and it will be archived on YouTube afterwards, so you can view it afterwards if you want to. So this is the board's first meeting in person for more than a year, so it's nice to see everybody. Due to the current restrictions that are in place, we are limited with the number of people we can have in the room. So some officers who are presenting reports will be joining the meeting virtually, so you should be able to see them on the big screens behind me. So following the annual meeting of the County Council in May, the board needs to reappoint its chairman for the next municipal year or this current year. So I'll move straight to item 1 on the agenda, which is appointment of chairman. Now, in line with the board's terms of reference, you're asked to note that Mrs. Louise Richardson, who is the County Council's lead member for health, has been appointed the chairman of the Health and Wellbeing Board. So welcome, Mrs. Richardson. And now I'll hand over you to take us through the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan. Before we move on to agenda item 2, I'll just quickly confirm the names of those members who have sent their apologies. So we have Rashna Vyas and we have Faye Bayliss. Is she here yet? No. Oh, right. Okay, thank you. Professor Lakhani, and we have Dr. Jeff Hanlon as substitute. Mrs. Taylor, Jane Moore, John Wilson, and we have Heather Pick as substitute. Mike Sands, and we have Viv Robbins as substitute, Adam Street, Rupert Matthews, Jane Toman, and we have John Richardson as substitute, and Hayley Jackson. Item number 2, appointment of the vice chairman. You're asked to appoint the clinical representative of East Leicestershire CCG, which has responsibility of chairing the integration executive, Dr. Vivek Varakantam as the board's vice chairman. Is everyone happy with that? Thank you. Item 3, the minutes. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January 2021 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. All in agreement? Thank you. There are no urgent items. So we go on to item 5, declarations of interest. Do any members have any other interests they wish to declare in respect of items on the agenda? None, thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Corfin. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just realised my son works for the NHS England. Whether that's got to be noted, please advise me.
Thank you. Next, we have my position statement. Copies were emailed to you, and a version's also on the council's website. My position statement includes an update concerning the local response to the coronavirus pandemic, including information on the number of patients being treated in hospital, the vaccination programme and the delivery of adult social care, the communications campaign, etc. Do any members have any questions regarding the update they received? No? Thank you. On behalf of the board, I would like to thank all those who continue to manage and deliver the local response and the recovery work. Item number 7. This concerns the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy refresh, pages 11 to 24. This report presents to the board a proposed approach to the development of a revised Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy, and Viv Robbins, Public Health Consultant, will present the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Richardson. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Lovely. So thanks for letting me join you today. As Mrs. Richardson has introduced, the paper that we've got here is looking at a proposed approach to the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy. As we know, this is due for renewal in 2022, and thinking about how we can evolve the Health and Wellbeing Board to support the development of that strategy. So,
Sorry, Viv, could you just speak up a little bit?
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
is that,
Cheers.
am I better if I'm this way? But I might
Can you
bring a
sit?
chair over. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Is that better? Thank you. In terms of background context, many of you will be aware, and I won't go into the detail because I know Sarah's presenting on the integrated care system in a second. But we have got a number of opportunities that are presented in terms of the development of the integrated care system that we do need to consider when we're looking at how that reflects to Place and Leicestershire as that place. One of the key things that is a key driver in the integrated care system is the development of place-led plans. And there's a real opportunity about how we as Leicestershire can bring the Health and Wellbeing Board agenda to collectively agree the priorities for Leicestershire by the proposal, which is to basically align the joint health and wellbeing strategy and the place-led plan to be the plan for Leicestershire. So I think one of the things that I'm really trying to look for in this is that we collectively is a really important element of this, to develop one clear vision that all partners have supported in developing and are really keen to implement collectively together. So the paper just talks about the proposals in terms of what we can do in terms of evolving the Health and Wellbeing Board to support this approach, and also the approach for the joint health and wellbeing strategy. So key things for the development of the Health and Wellbeing Board look at things such as governance arrangements. We know that it's a statutory committee under the Health and Social Care Act, and we have statutory responsibilities in terms of the joint health and wellbeing strategy, but also the joint strategic needs assessment. And it's about how we align those statutory responsibilities with the extra statutory responsibilities that are coming through the ICS. So we will be looking at how we can look at the terms of reference of the current Health and Wellbeing Board and making sure that we have got the right partners involved to support that agenda and progress that collectively. The other area that we want to look at is the governance structure within the Health and Wellbeing Board. So Figure 8 talks about trying to align that with some of the ICS transformational priorities, which Sarah will come to in her presentation, but thinking about how we have the right subgroups underneath the Health and Wellbeing Board to really drive that agenda forward. And one of the key proposals there is looking at how we maybe expand the remit of what is currently the Unified Prevention Board to looking at developing a wider Staying Healthy partnership that can really tackle some of those issues around primary prevention and the wider determinants of health, which I know we've got a discussion on later on this afternoon. The other area that we want to consider is around engagement and delivery, and really making sure that we have active engagement with our local residents around what is right for them and what they see are the priorities for Leicestershire, not necessarily what we think. And we are looking at how we can develop a sort of longer term communication and engagement approach that will certainly support the joint health and wellbeing strategy development, but actually is an ongoing conversation. So it really is the start of the conversation rather than anything else. We're really keen that we really do develop a Leicestershire approach collectively as partners, and almost a sort of Leicestershire Alliance approach. So we've put in the proposal around developing a consistent look and feel for Leicestershire, and that might involve looking at some sort of visual identity for the Health and Wellbeing Board. And the key final thing I think around the Health and Wellbeing Board itself is looking at how we as a board work. We acknowledge that there is a significant contribution to the range of partners that are around this table today, but also may not be in this meeting, to improving the health and wellbeing of our local population. And it's about how we can proactively set the agenda from the Health and Wellbeing Board to really prioritise those key integration and health and care issues, while also allowing partners to continue to do the work that they do so well and continue to drive. So in terms of the approach, we're looking at a sort of a do, sponsor and a watch approach. So a do area would be an area that we would identify as one of the key priorities in the joint health and wellbeing strategy. We would look at, it's almost an area that we would have a spotlight on. It would be one of those wicked issues where it's very much a multi-agency delivery approach and accountability. We would make sure that each priority has a senior responsible officer, the appropriate matrix or dashboard associated with that. And there is a regular reporting and discussion at the board. And so we have time on the board for those particular priority areas. The sponsor areas are areas that are still really important to the work of the Health and Wellbeing Board, but maybe they're areas that some work has already started. It might just need a renewed focus, or it's an area that we maybe want to keep an eye on in the Health and Wellbeing Board, but maybe not as regularly. So that might be an area that's linked into some of the wider ICS design groups, or some of the work that's already going on in the Health and Wellbeing subgroups. Again, this would have a sponsor from the Health and Wellbeing Board, but it wouldn't necessarily be discussed on every meeting unless that sponsor felt that the area needed escalating. The final area is around watch. So these are areas that are still really important to the prevention and healthing inequalities agenda, but they're more aligned to a single organisation, or they might already be done as business as usual, or they might already have an established infrastructure. So these wouldn't specifically be brought to the board's attention unless there was a key reason for that. And in terms of areas that would be watched and sponsored, there would be a list of those that are published, that we can make sure that people are really aware of who is leading that work, so that we can still make sure that that integration work happens underneath. In terms of the development of the revised joint health and wellbeing strategy, so as I've mentioned, this current strategy needs to be renewed for 2022, and there is the proposal to align the joint health and wellbeing strategy to be the place-led plan. To drive this work, we have already established a monthly project board that has a wide range of partners on that, and the organisations that are represented are detailed in Appendix B. If there are any gaps on those, please do let me know, and we are more than happy to consider where we need to expand that attendee list, because we really do want it to be driven by partners and owned by partners. As I've mentioned, we're looking at taking the lifestyle approach, the life course approach, and looking at those ICS transformation priorities, but acknowledging that we need to make the narrative right for Leicestershire, and there will be some cross-cutting themes that we need to consider in terms of wider determinants, thinking about families and communities, and how we link in some of those wider provider collaboratives and things like that. We acknowledge that the strategy will need to take the balance between having an overarching Leicestershire approach, but also acknowledging that a lot of work is already being developed in terms of district level plans, locality plans, and some of that granular detail in sort of the lower neighbourhood level. So it will be a balance around trying to get the best of both and making sure that the strategy works for everybody as much as we possibly can. And there is an acknowledgement that delivery will need to be at the right geography that seeks the needs of those local populations, and actually definition of neighbourhoods might be slightly different depending on what service that is or how that needs to be delivered. In terms of timelines, we are proposing to bring a draft of the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy to the next board, which is on the 25th of November, I think. And we would also bring some recommendations for reviewing the terms of reference and the subgroups for approval to the board. I think they're the key messages. So I'll just hand back to yourself, Mrs. Richardson. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Does anyone have anything to say? I think it's really, sorry, go on, Mark.
Thank you. Just for avoidance of doubt, I'm Mark Whiteman. I'm Director of Strategy at UHL, University Hospital Leicester. I thought it was a really, really good report, actually, Viv. And I'm enthusiastic about what the approach and the positioning of the Health and Wellbeing Board. There's a specific question around the do, sponsor, watch element, where you're saying that there'll be highlight reports annually on some of those sections under sponsor, which I kind of get, but that relies on whoever the sponsor is, making sure that if they are going off track, that the Health and Wellbeing Board is notified in a timely manner. What we can't have happening is you're notified at the end of the year, by which point the potential to do something about it, or kind of maybe even crack the whip a little from the Health and Wellbeing Board's point of view, it is kind of lost. So I think describing the role of the sponsor really kind of firmly will be quite important on this. But I think it's a really good paper.
Yes, Dr.
Thank you. I think again it's a really good paper. I think it does a lot of things that I think that we need to do, having an overarching plan. Just one question, Viv, and one comment. The question is, I didn't really get how we can look at what the neighbourhoods are doing and how that would feed in. And that's maybe just the way that I read it. It's probably already been thought about. And the comment would be in just terms of the membership. I think one of the key people that haven't been involved in that are the PCNs. And I think they are an absolutely key player in that. And obviously, following our work in OB and Wigson, I think the person that would be useful would be the schools. I think, again, particularly if we've got living, particularly with our child programs, I think that'd be particularly useful to get something in from the schools if possible, if they're engaged. Thank you.
There's a lady at in the public gallery who's having real trouble hearing. So could we raise our voices a little bit, and perhaps you'd like to move over here? Yeah, I think there's something it's not very good on the volume. So if you want to move forward, and people just bear that in mind, please, when you're speaking. Yeah, on that back row will be fine. It just might be easier for you. On the yellow, yeah. I wouldn't like you to be here and spend all day not listening, not hearing. Thank you. Dr. Hanlon, please.
I think this is probably as much a question for Vivek. Certainly this week there's been a whole series of meetings of PCN clinical directors and federations, particularly triggered from a meeting on Tuesday. And I think we at some stage need to distinguish between CCG membership and membership of general practice, and how those PCNs and clinical directors are going to be represented, particularly on the project board, or if they already fully are.
Sarah.
Thank you. Viv, I think we've talked about this, but I just want to make sure we're including it. So there's a requirement, isn't there, in the ICS development for place-based groups to develop an integration plan. And I think we see that integration plan being the health and wellbeing refresh strategy, doesn't it? But that may mean that it just goes into areas it might not have gone into previously, because in effect it will be a combination of the health and wellbeing strategy and the Better Care Fund approach. Yeah, and we're going to tackle both of those things within the refresh.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. So it really is around bringing one almost umbrella vision for Leicestershire. And I think it is acknowledging that the current health and wellbeing strategy went so far, and actually we need to think about how we are really driving that integration agenda together properly, and really coming up with what are the key priorities for integration, not just in terms of looking at some of the, I know we've concentrated quite a lot around secondary care integration at the moment, but I'd be really keen to look at how we broaden that across the wider prevention sphere, and really taking that angle around health inequalities and wider determinants of health as well.
Mr. Richardson, John.
Thank you. John Richardson, representing district councils today. And I think we want to say we totally support the approach and welcome it. So thank you for that. And particularly we acknowledge the kind of district level plans and the place-based approach. And we absolutely want to be part of that going forward, and want the importance of housing kind of recognised within any subgroups that work through that structure as we go forward. So very much support it, but absolutely want to be involved at that kind of local district level to ensure we can feed into that appropriately. We will come back to you on the representation as well, because it perhaps would be helpful to have 2 district members there as part of that board, but we'll come back to you kind of offline on that one. Thanks, Viv.
Andy, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So I think this is a really important discussion, and it's great that we've got this ambition. Just one thought, I think there may be issues, even on a scale as large as Leicester, where there are issues that go beyond the Leicestershire boundary, and we need to think about the adjacencies with other areas. That would be particularly relevant in the context of the integrated care system, which of course includes the county, but also the city and Rutland. But there may be other boundaries. You know, Leicestershire's a big place with a kind of adjacencies with a number of surrounding areas. So I think having an eye on those things that we want to do on an even wider footprint, or things we need from partners in our immediate area to do, would be a good idea as well. And we just need to have a mandate to carry that, I think, into those other conversations.
Thank you. I think they're great comments, and I look forward to seeing how this comes out, because it's a great opportunity for us all to make a real difference. And as long as we all work in partnership and work for the same goal, we can achieve quite a lot together, I think. So thank you very much. The board is asked to approve the proposed development of the revised joint health and wellbeing strategy, to note the establishment of the partnership project board, and note the intended review of the governance structure of the health and wellbeing board, including terms of reference and subgroups. Note the development of the health and wellbeing board communication and engagement strategy plan, and to note that a draft revised joint health and wellbeing strategy will be presented to the Health and Wellbeing Board for approval to consult at its meeting on the 25th of November. Are we all agreed? Yes, thank you. Moving on to item 8, the overview of the integrated care system and its purposes, principles and priorities. That's on pages 25 to 44. This report and presentation provides the Health and Wellbeing Board with an overview of the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Integrated Care System. Sarah Prima, Executive Director, Strategy and Planning at the LLR CCGs, will present the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and afternoon, everybody. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview about where we are with integrated care systems, particularly in light of a couple of important documents that have come out in recent weeks. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a document came out that was called the System Design Framework, which effectively was the ask of each system in terms of how it should be designing the integrated care system, particularly for statutory status from April 22. And the bill that underpins that those changes has actually been laid in Parliament this week, and it's going through its process. So we've now got a parliamentary process effectively that's in process that's supporting the development of statutory ICSs from April 22. So in terms of what integrated systems, care systems are, they're effectively an enabling vehicle to transform health and care across a particular geography. And I'll come on to geography in a moment. And they're about joining up and coordination of health and social care. So a little bit on what we've just touched on with Viv's paper. And then proactive and preventative focus. So much more about how do we stop people getting ill? How do we manage their conditions, etc. And they should be responsive to the needs of the local populations. They're grounded in a few principles, I think, and they're around, and this is what makes it different to where we've been trying to work before. So they're grounded in planning for populations and population health outcomes, and reducing inequalities and unwarranted variation, rather than necessarily treating conditions or illnesses. Building on system and place-based partnerships, so acknowledging there are things that are best done at systems and there are things that are best done at place. And we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between those two things in a moment. Subsidiarity and local flexibility, so really doing things at the right level So where it makes sense to do it at place, you should do it at place. There should be no reason why you shouldn't be doing that. And local flexibility in the way that we develop integrated care systems. And that's really important. When they were talking about the development of the guidance, etc., for us to develop our integrated care systems, they said that 80% of it would be for local flexibility and 20% would be mandated. And I actually do think that has come through in both the guidance and the bill. And they're really grounded in collaboration. So how do we work together across the public sector to improve outcomes for our populations? And integrated care systems are here to improve outcomes for the population, really tackle the inequalities, both in outcomes, but also in experience and access, and to support partners' input to the broader social and economic development of an area through a number of approaches, but particularly through an anchor approach, which a number of you may be familiar with. And it's really how can the NHS in particular add to that agenda locally and work with local authorities and other sectors within the system to do that jointly. And there's also a requirement for us, as there always is, to have a productivity and value for money lens as well as we develop our systems. So in LLR, we've been doing a lot of work over the last few years around, well, what does our system look like? So at a system level, we're really clear. It's Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. We don't have any boundary issues. In some areas across the country, they are having to go through a process of changing their boundaries to align them to unitary authorities. But we are, although we have 3 unitary authorities within LLR, we are coterminous with that whole, if you like. So our system is Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. We're really clear. Our places are our 3 unitary authorities. So that's Leicester City Council, Leicestershire County Council and Rutland County Council. And then we do have neighbourhoods. And at the moment, we're basing those on our local integration hubs. So the thing that those hubs where we deliver care at the moment through Leicestershire Partnership Trust, etc. So what does it mean for Leicestershire in terms of developing an integrated care system? The first thing I'd say is that this isn't a new approach. So this, for me, this is about integration of health and social care and about how we take the next steps and make that bigger and better. Particularly about how do we understand and work with our communities? How do we develop our population health management approach? How do we join up and coordinate services, and how do we address those wider and economic determinants of health together? All of those things will form part of what Viv just talked about, but for me it's building on what we've done already, but making it better and stronger by being able to take forward some of these things. So in terms of what we've done collectively before, in terms of what we've done around integration, I thought it might be useful just to remind ourselves that this isn't a journey that we're just starting. We have developed community-based teams across health and social care to keep people independent and well at home. You will have heard about that in previous meetings, I'm sure. We've worked across organisations to organise home support for home. Organise a home and support for people who have been in long-term hospital care, and particularly those in learning disability institutions. We've worked collectively together to do that. Obviously, the delivery of the COVID vaccination programme has been a whole system approach, and we've worked collectively together to do that. We've moved some planned care into settings closer to home to where people live. That's more of an integration at a planned care level. We've worked with voluntary sector to develop mental health services that are locally based, and we've also got community-based services that ensure that people don't, when their illness gets worse, but they don't need to go into hospital, they can actually stay at home with additional wraparound services. And again, that's been joint work between the local authorities and health over the years. And then I did ask Faye and John about the things that they would, what are their priorities around integration going forward? And they gave me 3 things, something around the procurement of home care, we need to redo that across Leicestershire. That's a really key thing in terms of transformation and integration for health and social care going forward. The investment in the Ageing Well programme and how we use that within community response services, and implementing a model of care coordination across Leicestershire. So just a little bit of an overview about what is the guidance and the bill actually saying around the ICF infrastructure and what we should have in place. So at place level, the Health and Wellbeing Board is the driver of place, if you like, and then that will be, I mean, as part of this work, we are going to review the governance. I think we've just talked about that. But at the moment, we have an integration and delivery executive that's sit underneath the Health and Wellbeing Board that drives that work at place level. And we will need something like that going, continually going forward. And then at system level, there's a requirement for us to have two groups. There's a health and care partnership group that will drive the work that we can do collectively together across health and care at a system level. And then there will be an ICS board that effectively will replace the CCG's function. So the CCGs will disappear on the 1st of April 22 and will be replaced by a statutory ICS body. And it will be the LLR ICS NHS board that will effectively be the statutory committee to that group, and that group will be responsible for the NHS business, joining the NHS business up across LLR. I just wanted to touch on place. I have touched on it a bit. So we're doing quite a bit of work collectively around looking at our place infrastructure. I've just touched on the groups that we've already got. So we will be looking at that again as we go through the next phase of the development. And then just a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of each of those boards. So as I've just said, the NHS board will take on the statutory responsibilities of the CCG. It will lead the integration across the NHS. So it will, for example, like the planned care work, it will join up planned care across acute and community, for example, where elective care can be done in the community. It will bring together providers of healthcare. And it will encourage joint working across those organisations. It will have shared strategic priorities, but it will also be responsible for working with the wider partnership around population health and health inequalities and that transformation and integration of health and care. The health and care partnership group will be a group of NHS and local government as equal partners. It will have a responsibility for a joint action around improving health and care, influencing the wider determinants of health and the broader and social and economic development, developing an integrated care strategy and support the place and neighbourhood infrastructure. So there is a little bit about membership at the moment in terms of those groups. So in terms of the Health and Care Partnership Group, it should have a jointly appointed chair. It should have representatives from local authorities that are responsible for social care, so i.e. our unitary authorities. It should have NHS representation on it, but over and above that, it's down to local determination. So it's up to us to agree what we want that board to do and how the membership fits. And I think one of the key questions that we need to work out is how does it fit in? What's its role when we've got health and wellbeing boards as well? And then in terms of the LLR ICS board, it must have an independent chair, a minimum of 2 non-executive directors, an ICS chief executive, and then there is some guidance from NHS England about there must be a director of finance, a director of nursing, a medical director, trust representatives and primary care representation, and also local authority reps on that board as well. But other membership is for local determination. And just very briefly, in terms of timeline, a new statutory organisation, this is all subject to obviously the bill going through Parliament over the next couple of weeks. But the plan at the moment is that the new statutory ICS will start on the 1st of April. We will start to do some appointments to the more senior roles in Q2 and Q3 of this year. And we will work through our governance and our arrangements for how the core ICS group will work again in Q2 and Q3. And as you can appreciate, there'll be a lot of technical and due diligence work to close down 3 CCGs and establish a single CCG, a single ICS, and that will be ongoing through the next few months and to April 22. And to support that timeline and the work that needs doing, we've established a transition group to assure all organisations basically that we're on track with that work. So I think I'll stop there and take any questions, and then I might just go back to the purpose, principles and priorities at the end, if that's all right, Councillor. Thank you.
That's fine, thanks, Sarah. Does anyone have anything to ask or comments to make? No, I should carry on with your principles now.
Okay, so one of the first tasks that we've been doing as a group is looking at what the ICS purpose, principles and priorities should be. And this has been a multi-professional and multi-agency group, and it's been effectively a task and finish group of our current health and care partnership. And we developed it over a series of workshops with the health and care partnership group, and then each organisation was represented on task and finish groups in between meetings. And we've come up with basically a purpose, which is about working together for everyone in Leicestershire and Rutland to have healthy and fulfilling lives. There's a set of principles. I won't go through them here because you've got them in your pack. There's also a set of priorities at a transformational level, and they link back to the life courses we were just talking about in terms of the health and wellbeing. And then there are a set of operational priorities which will be predominantly for the NHS ICS board to deliver, but there will be a little bit of overlap in terms of how we deliver that with partners. So I'm looking for feedback in relation to those as well, please, today.
Thank you, Sarah. Has anybody any feedback on that? Oh, Viv, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Richardson. So just a couple of comments really from me, and thanks, Sarah, for giving a really helpful overview. And I think, you know, building on what Sarah said, there's some real opportunities here, and I think it really is about how we, as a partnership, do capitalise on those. I think just a couple of things from me is we talk a lot around health inequalities and prevention being everything in what we do, and then when we come to actually some of the principles, we've not actually mentioned health inequalities and prevention in the initial principle. I know it then comes into some of the priorities, but I'd be really looking at how we can really extend the integration agenda to really looking at how we improve healthy life expectancy, and if there's something we can do around adding in something around healthy life expectancy and really pushing the boundaries, I think, in terms of our integration work more into a prevention lens. So obviously we're doing a lot around sort of secondary and tertiary prevention in terms of stopping people from getting worse from the conditions that they have. But actually, we talk a lot about prevention, but are we really pushing and doing and putting our money where our mouth is, I suppose, to really push and drive to those primary prevention things and the causes of the causes to stop people having those in the beginning. So for me, there's something around if there's a bit more work we can do about expanding that prevention ethos. And I know we've got the LLR health inequalities framework coming up shortly, and one of the key principles we've put in that is around health inequalities being everything we do and prevention being everything that we do. So I just didn't know, Sarah, if there's something we could do around sort of building on that a little bit. And the other point really for me was around the delivery, and I think there's going to be a lot of work around really working out what happens at system, place and neighbourhood, and I think that having that 80% flexibility you're talking about, Sarah, I think will be really beneficial, and just saying that some of the work that I think we do around the joint health and wellbeing strategy will hopefully pad out some of that work. So, you know, I look forward to working collectively around that with you, really. That's all from me.
I quite agree, Vivian. I think prevention and for trying to keep people as well as possible for as long as possible will help everybody in, you know, as well as the patient. And I mean, we're looking at an elderly population going forward, and we want to make sure that those people are having the care that will keep them out of hospital, really. So those with acute care have the benefit. Thank you. Councillor Rudd.
Right, thank you, Chairman. Just one thing, yeah, it's all well and good when we're dealing with it when you get older and you've got the health problems. We need to make sure we start from a very young age and teach them about cooking and eating healthy, because it's so easy that you read, don't you, that they just live on this crap food, really, rather than learning how to cook and then throwing stuff away. And I think we've really got to start from an early age, and hopefully it carries on through. You know, there's a lot cheaper to cook for yourself rather than going out and buying ready meals. But yes, I found it very interesting. And with my adults head on, we are in the county, you know, going forward with helping people to live independently and stay out of hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with those statements. And I also think you have been going into some schools and doing some cooking with them. So I think that's one of the things that's been picked up. Mark, thank you.
Yeah, I just thought I'd give you the kind of the hospital perspective on this, and this is not my thinking. This is from talking to some of our clinical teams. So it's a bit esoteric, isn't it? The whole description of what an ICS is and the kind of changes and the legislation that goes through. But when I was explaining it to a clinical colleague of mine the other day, they essentially replied, "Oh, I get it. You mean the NHS is going to start planning as if it's one organisation, and then we're going to start planning with our local authority colleagues as if we're a genuine health and care organisation." And I kind of said, well, yeah. And actually, that really does encapsulate what this ICS thing is all about, really. So we're in the 73rd birthday year of the NHS. And up until about 2 years ago, for 71 of the years of the NHS has planned in isolation of each other. So EMAS has had its own plan, CCGs have had their plan, trusts, both LPT and UHL have planned in separation. And then we wondered why actually patients fall through the gaps. If you apply that to social care as well, and some of the work that councillors are involved in, then it kind of makes, I'm slightly embarrassed by it, why we haven't done this before. So from my point of view and that of my colleagues at UHL, this is really exciting territory, because the other thing I'd say around the NHS is at the moment it's inaccurately named. It's called the National Health Service, whereas actually it's the National Treatment Service. We spend all our money on treating people once they get poorly and not enough money on preventing them get poorly. So I'm not suggesting we rename the NHS, but I just think we need to understand that that's the focus of ICS, and that's what makes it so appealing to everybody involved. And I hope councillor colleagues understand that we are deeply enthusiastic and massively looking forward to working with you and health and social care colleagues.
I think that's really good to hear, because I think too often in big organisations we do have a bit of a silo effect, and it's having that holistic view right across the county from all partners, isn't it? Thank you. Mr. Richardson, John, you were first.
Chair, Mukesh Barrott, Chief Officer, Health Watch, Leicester and Leicestershire. We had a conversation last week, and just to echo some of the points raised by colleagues here, that this is a great opportunity with the ICS to involve the public, local people as stakeholders, or as part of common purpose. And one of the things that I'd like to see as part of Health Watch is how that patient involvement is included within strategy and planning, so that they are not involved at a later stage when design and services are already planned. But for example, there's a campaign to let them know what ICS is and how they can engage with the process. And then that's where I see a true partnership of collaboration. And like some of the points that the respected councillor made about, social lifestyle and eating habits, and, that preventative action that will reduce pressure on the NHS or new models of service. Thank you.
No, I think early consultation with public is really key to this. I think as soon as we've got our principles and everything set out, then I think it'd be sensible to then go to out to the public and get their views. John, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'm happy for Councillor Kaufman to go first, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. I think the idea of working together and combining, it can't be faulted. I mean, we've been talking about it for years, But the trouble is, I've been around long enough, and I remember PCGs and CCGs, and the people that seemed to be making the money were the ones who were changing and getting the logos and changing the colour paint. So if this actually works, I do welcome it. But we've got two services. One is you get for free on demand when you need it, and one is a means tested service. Both of them are underfunded, but the means tested service, government will be talking about for years how you're going to cope with it and what you're going to do, and government after government, and nobody's come up with an answer yet. So whereas I'm delighted we're talking about it, and I really hope it works, I'm a wee bit cynical. But from how long do you give it before we can measure the improvements as far as the patients and the residents are concerned?
Thank you. I agree that we have to keep our fingers on the pulse and get things moving. I think we have to work to this as quickly as we can to be able to see objectives coming, you know, and we've got to have outcomes that we can measure on this. And I think we've already discussed that at other meetings with officers. Andy.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really fair challenge, isn't it? And one of the things we're going to have to do, I think, is be very clear what it is we are measuring and looking at, because it's very easy to kind of talk the talk and then not actually do the kind of counting. But the point I was going to make, I think, was that this isn't a sudden about face. It's not as though we've deliberately not collaborated at all forever and now suddenly it's all going to be okay. The way that I see this rather is that it's an evolution of some of the things that we've started to do with really good effect, actually, particularly over the last 12, 18 months. We've got lots of good examples of where we do collaborate together to good effect, and we've done it particularly well in response to some of the challenges of COVID, actually, ironically, and the vaccination program. And we can point over the years to lots of really great examples around the way we support vulnerable elderly, the safeguarding approaches we've had in place for children. What we've seen is kind of pockets, like little flashes of excellence, but we've never managed to stitch it all together into one concerted, continuous process. And so I think I mean, I take your point entirely, and I think it's entirely understandable. I think we all have that sense, but I would say that we've got quite a lot to build on. And I guess the challenge for us is to kind of make sure we get all of that and then add some value on it together. And in terms of integration, which is essentially what this is about, I mean, I think there are two fundamental tests, really. The first and perhaps the most important is, what does it feel like to the people who actually receive services? You know, that's the acid test, isn't it? We can talk all we like, but if they don't experience something that feels joined up to them, then we've probably not nailed it. So I think the earlier point about the engagement of people who are using services as citizens of the community is really important. And the second is the extent to which we can show alignment. You know, is our housing policy and our community safety policy lined up with our health policy, lined up with our social care policy? Is that kind of reinforced by the recreational and leisure policy? You know, all of these things can work together. And then I think if you can show that impact, you can really start to kind of say that you're making a difference. So we've got quite a lot of intellectual work to do, I think, as a group, to work out what are we going to count to tell us whether this is making a difference or not. I think that's actually one of the more exciting parts of our work, really. And it'd be great to get, you know, picking up your point earlier, to get service users and the public engaged in that process right from the get-go, actually.
Can I just add to Andy's feedback? Andy, Healthwatch, including Rutland, Leicester and Leicestershire, would love to work with all the partners in ICS, and maybe we can use the role of Healthwatch as the people's voice, if you like, to be able to get a timeline at an early stage, so that we can come back to the comment that the elected member made about when can we plan the evaluation of whether things are working or not. And I think that's something that's doable within that sort of integrated approach. Thank you.
John, for about the third time, I think.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of points that have been made already, actually, totally agree with Mark in terms of it's an exciting opportunity, and Andy's point that we absolutely want to build on the collaboration and the work that we've been doing so far. Districts do feel involved, and we want to continue that. The comment I want to make is how we can take that a stage further, because I totally agree with Viv's point about prevention, but even before that, we want to design in from the outset in terms of our place shaping and the role that district councils play around planning and housing, and how we can really build that in at the very early stages. And Andy covered some of those areas that we absolutely want to click from the start around open spaces and well-being in neighbourhoods and places. So maybe we just need to kind of have further conversation on how districts can get involved in the system, but not just a neighbourhood level, but a system approach level. Thank you.
Christine, thank you.
Yeah, just a quick one. It's very hard to prove, isn't it, money spent on prevention, which then, follows up further up the ladder. We're going to have a job, I think, to get the public behind us, because the first instinct will be, they're trying to get rid of the health service and do away with that. So I think we've got to be very careful how we inform the public. I'm going to say something that sounds really silly. There are points come from COVID, like you said, that we've all worked together and that. So I think in a way, COVID has brought us together on some things quicker than what we might have done. And the gentleman over there said about planning. Yes, I'm always having to go because I've also a borough councillor, and in fact, I'm having to go now. There's a planning thing going through, and because the town council wanted some open space, the Charlwood Planning Department have said it doesn't meet the SIF. So I am furious. We've got to really, like you said, think about how people live, the health and well-being of them from the start, and work it up. So it's difficult, I think, to bring everybody in, because we keep saying we want more houses, but more houses also we need to make sure that they're healthy and they've got open space for children to go out and play, because the gardens aren't as big as what they used to be. That's it, I've had my say.
Thank you. Viv?
Thanks, Mrs. Richardson. It was just really following on from all the points that have been raised here, and I think I echo, what everybody has said here in terms of really getting partners together, making sure that we're getting the right people around the table. We are really thinking about those discussions when it comes to planning and making sure that we are utilising all the value of all the partners around the table. And I suppose really it's just a plea to say we've got this opportunity now with developing the joint health and wellbeing strategy in Leicestershire, and that will be as good as what we put into it. So, really would advocate for, if you think that people are not involved in the agenda and they need to be, or there's something that we're missing as we go along, and picking up around the health watch point, we are really keen that we do engagement before we get to a draft strategy. So then when we consult, we've already done a lot of engagement with our local population around that. So please do contact Joe or myself in terms of getting involved, because we really are keen to try and drive that to get agenda together collectively. Thank you.
I think it's really important that initial getting everybody around the table is the if we don't get that right, then the rest falls away. So we must do that. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you. Heather Pick, adult social care. And just speaking on behalf of social care, I don't think any of us would have any problem with any of the principles, and certainly for social care, they are the foundation of the principles that we already work to. So it's really good to see that we're not setting up a new set of principles, but actually reinforcing, jointly working together for this. If the principles are adopted across the system as a system set of principles, then that can only enhance the joint working together. If that then leads to joint commissioning of services and a joint approach for solutions on a place base and a neighbourhood base, then I think that is a great opportunity, and we would want to be part of that and be sitting around the table. So welcome the report.
It's kind of on that point, but also on the point that Councillor Kaufman made earlier on around the NHS is free at the point of delivery and social care is going to means tested. And it is I think another downstream benefit of this is, at the moment, if you consider that both social care and the NHS were formed on the same day in 1948, there's a kind of a sibling relationship between those two parts of the system, but one sibling gets all the presents and the other sibling doesn't, and that's inequitable in itself. So I'm rather hoping that actually this is a kind of foretaste of what hopefully will come when the government gets around to doing its social care green white paper. But actually, I think one of the potentials for this group, because we're coming together on a joint agenda, is rather than the NHS lobbying for more cash through settlements with Treasury, social care doing the same, we can start amplifying our voice together to say, actually, this is the right thing to do. Because quite often, actually, investment in social care will eventually save the NHS and vice versa. But we're always two voices rather than one voice. And I think that's really important for this group to recognise. I know you do anyway, but.
Thank you. Anyone further? Okay, the board is asked to note the content of the report and presentation and comment on the draft LLR ICS purposes, principles and priorities. Are we all happy to note that? Thank you. Item 11 concerns the wider determinants of the Health Action Plan, which are pages 103 to 124. This report seeks the board's approval for a wider determinants of Health Action Plan, which has been developed in response to recommendations arising from the Wider Determinants and Health Inequalities Health and Wellbeing Board Development Session, that's a long one, held on the 25th of March 2021. Kelly Evans, Public Health Consultant, will present the report. Should be on the screen, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Hopefully everyone had the chance to read the paper. So yes, we're looking to seek approval for the action plan, and it will align into the joint health and wellbeing strategy refresh. So as we've all been talking about, so we all know that obviously the social determinants of health have a massive impact on health outcomes, such as education, employment, and how people and how that impacts on their future health outcomes. So we just pulled together looking at trying to improve healthy life expectancy, because nationally life expectancy is stalling, and locally it is still increasing life expectancy, but healthy life expectancy is actually decreased locally. And we've all been discussing around how the wider determinants of health and maybe those underlying causes of why people are living in poor health for longer. And obviously, if you are living in poor health, you struggle more to contribute to society and their own community, so more likely to be reliant on statutory services. So the priorities in the plan were pulled together using the work that the King's Fund had done previously on if we were going to address some of the health impacts, where would we have the biggest gain? And then we looked at the Leicestershire data as well that suggested that might have areas for improvement. So the 5 priorities that are in the plan are around the best starting life, and we already have a children and young people's partnership plan, so obviously we'd need to link in with there. The natural and built environment and the strategic planning group has a health work stream, again looking at how through planning they could impact their impact that they could have on people's health, so hopefully aligning there. And then stronger communities and wellbeing, jobs and work, and linking with the growth unit around the economy and having a healthy economy and also a healthy population, and warmer and safer homes. So not just looking at new builds through the planning process, but actually most people in the county are living in existing housing stock, so how do we make sure that that isn't impacting their health? I won't necessarily go through all of the different actions, but hopefully you can see that we tried to base it on the data that we had in the county, and therefore what we might be able to do about it. From a next steps perspective, we wanted to, if approved, work with partners to look at what the plan might look like for the next 12 months. So how we might measure that impact and what actually could be done. So I'll stop there if anyone got any questions.
Anyone got any questions for Kelly?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for this piece, for this paper. I think it's really very, very good, actually. But I'm going to ask you a question that I was asked, and it's quite a difficult question, and I don't know the answer to it, so I'm asking you. So, in a sea of wealth, how do you find the people who are struggling, who are deprived, and will this address those individuals? Because as a county, we do have a large areas where people are extremely wealthy or have good access to health and other privileges, but there are pockets where there are not. So how will this particularly affect those individuals? And have we thought about that, and how does this document help?
Yeah, sorry, you kind of like went in and out, so I got every other word, but I think what you were asking was how does it reduce health inequalities? Is that kind of the underlying? So how would we identify those people that are more at risk of having worse health outcomes? Is that what you wanted me?
That's right, because if you just look at the total population, you might miss those individuals, individual families or groupings within the large populations. Have we been able to pick those out and support them with this?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I guess what we've tried to do is look at more across, but we would know, using the public health data, potentially where people are living that are more at risk, and we'd obviously want to work with those frontline services for them to almost be aware of maybe what they're presenting with isn't necessarily the reason why they're in poor health, if that makes any sense. So I guess it's using that making every contact count approach. So if there is someone presenting in front of you in poor health, how might we dig down a little bit deeper to understand actually what their social determinants are, and then maybe look to address those through partners. But obviously we'd need to understand what the wider offer would be. And I guess from a population perspective, then, yeah, we'd have to look at the data to see whether there's any particular areas in the county that might have more people more at risk of poor health outcomes due to where they live or what their education status is, or whether they're in work or not in work, would be my view about how I might go about that. Hopefully the plan has addressed some of that. In particular, it refers to trying to create good work, because in Leicestershire, we at the minute, and I imagine it's got worse through COVID, our sickness absent rate is quite high. So how do we work with employers to ensure that the work that they're offering is good work? I'm just trying to think what other. And then through the planning process, we're working with certain areas in the county to look at how we might embed health impact assessment. So hopefully, obviously we're piloting it, but in theory that should also pick up if there are any groups within our communities that would fare worse from either what the planning policy is saying, and be able to identify those and hopefully mitigate any adverse impacts. Would be off the top of my head, but happy to take it away and think more about every action, how we ensure it addresses health inequalities.
I think the work we'll be doing with neighbourhoods and everything as well will be able to feed into that. So it's very much linking with the neighbourhood groups too. Yes. Andy, please.
Thank you. Thanks for this report. It goes really to the heart of the purpose of the committee, doesn't it, really, and just trying to address the wider determinants. A question or a sort of an observation, really. One of the things that's really come through from talking to different groups in society about their response to recently things like the vaccination programme is it's highlighted the extent to which people's behaviour is driven by their sense of injustice or exclusion. And so this isn't just about opportunity, it's about the extent to which they feel motivated to take advantage of it, or even whether they trust the opportunity because of a legacy or a perceived or real heritage of being excluded or disadvantaged. So I think the question, I guess, is what can we do to try and work to promote inclusion and equity in the societies that we're responsible for locally, because individual behaviour is actually one of the big determinants of health outcome, isn't it? And some people, I think, are excluded or demotivated. So I'm kind of interested in that whole area, and it's something that I think has come into much starker relief for me, certainly, in the interactions of the last 6-8 months, where people simply don't trust the responses that we're offering. So, you know, here's a vaccination, I don't believe it's safe. Here's a screening program, it's not for me, it's aimed at someone else. And so we've got quite a challenge, I think, to even not just get an equity in terms of offer, but to persuade people that it is genuine and it is safe and fair for them to use.
Sarah. There's just a couple of things I just wanted some clarity on, really. So just building a little bit on what Andy's just said, we've heard a lot during COVID, both regionally and locally and internationally, actually, that the best responses from the public to the actions that we need to put in around COVID has been when we've asked the public what's right for them as a community or as a group of individuals. So I'm interested to know how much community involvement was involved in the development of this action plan, because I think, you know, the actions have got to come from the community in order for them to make a difference. That's one thing. The other thing about how do you envisage encompassing the population health management approach within this piece of work in terms of the wider determinants? And I was just interested about whether you thought about the anchor approach, because I do think that's really key in terms of tackling wider determinants. And excuse me if I've not found it in here, but I didn't think it came across strongly if it is in here, particularly around employment, training opportunities, around how we use our resources to procure locally, that impact that we can have as a public sector on social and economic, you know, in our populations, what that means for, you know, driving local businesses and things like that. So I'd just be interested in those three things. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I've missed the middle one, but I'll do the first and third one, and then if you can just remind me what the middle one was. Yeah, so communities at the moment haven't necessarily been involved in it, but we have included one of the actions around looking at the asset-based community development approach. So as part of that, obviously we've got the local area coordinators. So how do we use all the insight that they gather to actually inform the decisions that we make and service redesign? So it's probably more as a future action to look at how, yeah, the asset-based community development could be used, and we can ask them what they think of the 5 priorities. I think the actions at the moment within it probably need further development as we go through. So sort of like the next steps would be the what can we achieve in the next 12 months, and then how might we measure that impact. And then the anchor approach, yeah, so it might not have come through. I guess I've probably covered it more through the health and all policies, and how we, as what we can do as employers, rather than actually labelling it the anchor approach, but I'm more than happy to amend it and reference that approach in there. And what was the middle one? Sorry, I didn't write it down.
Sorry, I've not got the speaker on. The middle one was about population health management, and it links a bit to your answer to Vivek, I think, around how do we use population health management analysis and that rich data within this work.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously you'll be far more aware than others around the work that we're doing with your teams on the different plans and ensuring they are based on need. So yes, I am more than happy again to either reference it as population health management or ensure that there's an action within it that all work is based on need within the plan.
John, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's great to see a paper on the wider determinants of health and the action plan attached to it. So we really support that. And it's also great to hear about health impact assessments in planning, and that is, being part of the framework around the county. But I'd want to ensure that is consistently being applied by all district and borough councils. So probably just want to check that with you again outside of the meeting. But really good to hear that. And obviously, housing plays a significant part of the wider determinants. And I just want to ensure that you have good representation, on your working groups, to inform you the work of district and boroughs. So can you just clarify that is in place at the moment, Kelly?
Yeah, so I've tried to, each of the priorities, I think there's probably, although they're county-wide, but they each have a district representation on them. So we've been working with the Planning Officers Forum and also the Strategic Planning Group, which are predominantly district reps. So hopefully the districts are represented, but if you're aware of a district that doesn't feel they're represented, then I'm obviously more than happy to make sure they do feel like they're being represented.
Viv, please, sorry.
Thanks, Mrs. Richardson. So I just wanted to sort of add a bit more context around the work, just in terms of where this piece of work sits within the wider joint health and wellbeing strategy. And this piece of work came from the Health and Wellbeing Board Development Session, which I know Joe's going to talk about shortly in a second. And I suppose just to highlight, this is because we know that the wider determinants is such an important agenda item. What we didn't want to do was stop progress on this agenda and have a clear action plan in terms of where we need to start with this work while we're waiting for the wider joint health and wellbeing strategy to be developed. So in terms of some of the discussions around engagement, things like that wider engagement we can ensure is built into that wider joint health and wellbeing strategy work. And in terms of delivery, this again links into the discussion around looking at the subgroups and thinking around how we evolve that Staying Healthy partnership group to have those really broad Leicestershire discussions that involve the districts around how are we as Leicestershire looking at impact assessment on the developments that we're doing and having a joined up approach around that. So I think that subgroup will really help move some of that agenda forward. In terms of some of Andy's points around health equity, health inequalities angles and how we ensure some of the learning from COVID, for me that I've supported CCG a lot around the vaccination work, and I think it's been absolutely incredible actually, the partnership work, but also the level of engagement to really understand our local populations at a really low level to really support them in terms of improving their vaccination uptake. And I think there's a tremendous amount of learning that we need to do on that, and keen to work with yourself, Andy, around a really good evaluation of that programme, so we can see how we translate that learning not just to other vaccination programmes. We've got flu vaccination programme coming up soon, and other vaccination programmes, but screening programmes, but also wider access to our public sector services, because some of the issues have been really deep rooted, and I don't think we've ever really understood them as well as we have now. So again, keen to sort of work with you guys around how we can translate that. And in terms of the population health management approach, Sarah, and the anchor institution, using the anchor approach, for me, this action plan is almost the place in Leicestershire initial start to how we start developing the LLR inequalities framework, and it's the beginning of that journey. And in terms of the population health management approach, it's about making sure that what we commission is really based on need at a very local level. And we just need to be aware of what data we have that is cut at specific geographies. So some is only at Leicestershire level, some is at districts, some is at PCNs. And I think we need to be aware of where the data's at now and how we can collectively move to where we want it to be, but really make sure that we are using a needs-based approach to all our commissioning decisions. So that was it from me. Thank you.
Okay. We're asked to approve the wider determinants of health action plan. Are we happy to approve it with the comments made, Kelly, obviously, and if you can just tweak those few? Is everybody all right with that? Yep, thank you very much. I have an apology because I turned 2 pages at once. So we're now going to item 9, which is the outputs and recommendations arising from the Health and Wellbeing Board development session held on the 25th of March 2021, pages 45 to 58. And Jo Hewitt, Health and Wellbeing Board Manager, will present this report. Sorry to keep you waiting, Jo.
Everyone hear me? Excellent. Yeah, thank you. The development session held in March. It was the first virtual development session for the board. It had a positive response and engagement from partners that really started conversations. And I was just saying, as we've seen today, discussions have moved on significantly in regards to the wider determinants and also feeding into the health inequalities framework. Board members and colleagues from across the health and wellbeing landscape received presentations at the development session on wider determinants along with the health inequalities framework. And following these presentations, the breakout groups, as summarised in the paper, were facilitated by experts in their fields on housing and homelessness, communities, skills and work, and the natural and built environment, which Kelly's touched on in regards to how that's fed into the subsequent wider determinants plan. And those themes were chosen as key wider determinant areas, which research had highlighted, as has been outlined already, that this shows that can affect health outcomes and inequality. And they've also been used elsewhere to facilitate stakeholder sessions. We had pledges from partners, commitments were made, and they can be seen in Appendix C attached to the paper, and they've really helped to shape the approaches moving forward. They were very positive. It was a great flavour really of next steps and intentions of board members and colleagues who committed to a variety of different areas. So as the paper outlines, there were actions arising from the development session. I'm pleased to say that one of them, Kelly, has just presented the wider determinants plan. We've also got the health inequalities framework next on the agenda, which was one of the actions. And through the strategy refresh, we will be progressing the other actions, which the board will be kept updated on. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Does anyone want to make any comments? Dr. Hanlon?
I guess in terms of the actions, it's probably moved on since then. I was interested particularly in the bullet points around further work being undertaken to explore how the board could engage with PCNs. It's just to point out that we're very lucky in West that our PCN clinical directors have inherited the managerial and constitutional arrangements of the federations, so are able to present a single chief executive and clinical lead to enable that engagement and to cascade it. But I suspect we've already moved on to that point.
Thank you. Anybody else? So we're being asked to support the actions arising from the Health and Wellbeing Board development session as detailed in paragraph 8 of the report. Is everyone okay with that? Thank you. Item 10, the next report is to present the Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland Health Inequalities Framework, pages 59 and 100 to 102. This report presents the final version of the Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland Health Inequalities Framework to the board which was also an action of the wider determinants and health inequalities, health and wellbeing board development session. So Sarah Prima is going to present. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't need to tell any member of the committee that, you know, health inequalities is a key priority for us all across LLR. And, you know, that's being even brought into more contrast than the COVID pandemic. I just want to be really clear, this is not an attempt to replace the health and wellbeing strategies. We had long discussions about how, you know, should we producing a health inequality strategy across LLR, and we came to the conclusion, no, that's the responsibility of place, but we wanted to put something in place that effectively gave a framework to how as a system we would work together to try and tackle health inequalities and equity. And it has been developed through a group with multiple organisations, including local authorities, Health Watch, for example, the NHS, both providers and commissioners, and with a range of multi-professionals. So the public health teams have been intrinsically involved in the development of this, alongside staff from my team and the wider system. So after a long discussion about what this should be, we decided it should set out a number of principles, and there's 13 principles that are set out in the document, and should set out some key actions that as a system we would expect all partners to work towards in the development of both their work, but also in the development of their refreshes of their health and wellbeing strategy. So it does link very much back to that first item that we talked about this afternoon, sorry. And it's, you know, it's a bit of a start of the journey, so it's that framework. The detail will happen at place, so there'll be a detailed plan at place, which will be your refreshed health and wellbeing strategy. The one thing I would also say is that we are just getting a public-facing version of the framework completed. It is quite technical at the moment from a public health and NHS perspective. We're just turning that into a more public-facing document. So it's coming through its final feedback loop, if you like, and it will go to the Health and Care Partnership Group in August for a final sign-off. So I'm interested in any feedback or comments that people have got. And I'm sure Viv will add, because she's been intrinsically involved in helping us develop it. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, just supporting what you've said, really. I think this has been a real genuine partnership piece of work. It's been an evolution and it's been a journey to get here, but actually I think it's a really great document, and it's now about making sure that it doesn't sit on the shelf and that we actually translate it into action. And I think, as Sarah's mentioned, a lot of this work will be coming down to us here in place level, and it's about how we take hold of that and drive that forward. I think it's been a really useful exercise in terms of thinking around how we do work out what things potentially sit at system, what sit at place, and what sit at neighbourhood, and that's not easy. But I think it's been really helpful in terms of thinking around what things and what principles we can collectively agree across LLR, and then what things we need to deliver specifically for Leicestershire. And I think some of the actions that we've got as well, so you've got the principles which are across all LLR, and then you've also got the system actions, which are areas that will work across LLR as well. I think are a really useful framework for us to move on and move forward. And as I mentioned before, the wider determinants plan that Kelly really helpfully presented earlier is our first step around how we push this forward at pace and then develop that and really embed that, because I really am keen that you know, how we reduce health inequalities and make sure that everybody across Leicestershire gets the unequal opportunity to have the best health and wellbeing that they can is an absolutely core theme through all the work that we do, and it's really about thinking around how we as partners can embed that in everything that we do. Thank you.
Just press the speak.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. My name's Mark Powell. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec at Leicestershire Partnership Trust, so my first meeting. So nice to meet you all. Just a brief comment really on the paper. I mean, I think it's really good. It's really clear, and notwithstanding that the actions are very sort of focused on strategic decisions, I think there's probably some consideration we could take about how we could apply some of the actions at organisational level as well, so that we get that thread that goes from a strategic decision through organisations, so that we've got a really clear sort of oversight and level of accountability around what we do to try and address health inequality. So I think it's really helpful, and certainly for me, something we can take away in LPT and use it as a framework for decision making there as well.
Thank you. Okay, so we're asked to note the LLR Health Inequalities Framework and its intended implementation across partner organisations. All okay with that? Thank you. And now we go to item 12, the Air Quality and Health Action Plan, pages 125 to 134. This report provides us with an update concerning the progress to date to deliver the multi-agency Air Quality and Health Action Plan. And we're back to Kelly again now. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone. Yes, so we've included in the paper currently what actions exist within the Air Quality and Health Action Plan. So they've been mostly around active and sustainable travel, working with the planning departments to look at how we could embed health through the planning policy process, so that strategic overview of the local plan and how we can embed health in there. And I mentioned previously the work we're doing with Wellbeing, which has been the Town and Country Planning Association have offered to be our critical friend. So hopefully that will give us how best we could go about embedding health through there. And the other districts have said that they would also look at that. So hopefully in answer to your other question, that there should be a consistent approach. And then from a practice perspective of how we embed health impact assessment, we've been working with LRS to look at developing a healthy environment web portal. So any developer that is developing housing or office space, then or employment space, they also could conduct a health impact assessment through an online portal, which hopefully would then give us also oversight of those. The other priorities within it are around information sharing and campaigns. So hopefully most people would be aware that the 17th of June was Clean Air Day. So we use that as how we might therefore engage with local residents on actually what clean air made for them. And it was a really helpful campaign of people sending in pictures of what clean air meant for them. So we will use that to build on trying to understand from the residents' perspective actually what clean air means to them. So those were the original 3 that came from a workshop with partners, 2019, I think. So that piece of work feels quite embedded, and actions are happening. But looking forward, obviously, there's through COVID recovery work, there's been a huge opportunity to consider air quality. And I'm sure people had heard the governor's report around preventing future deaths of the little girl that died in London. So there's just the government are looking at reducing air quality levels. So it might be that there are other areas that we're currently looking at in the county that have higher air pollution levels due to the reduced marker, basically. We've been working with UHL to look at asthma and viral wheeze presentations in ED, and actually how that equates to the air quality data. Air quality data isn't as accurate as we would like it to be, so we have made some recommendations and we'll follow those up, but it's quite difficult to be able to demonstrate cause and effect. And I guess leading on from that, one of the areas we would like to develop further is how we work more closely with health partners, and it might be that you're doing lots around trying to improve air pollution, but I guess just an offer to work more closely with you. There is a clean air hospital framework that exists, so whether that's something we could look to embed across the county, or health services within LLR. So that was probably all I was going to say. If anyone's got any questions.
Ellie, anyone? No, John?
Yeah, just to comment, Chair, that you know, clearly last year, you know, there's been an interesting subject with the lack of transport and home working in particular. So none of the air quality management areas will be changed, you know, in the year that's just gone by, and clearly the work going forward, it'll be interesting to see, you know, how it comes back in terms of the levels through the monitoring for next year, and what that may mean for Leicestershire. So I think it's a very interesting time just to kind of see the impact and what lessons, you know, we can potentially learn and you know, improve going forward on the back of, you know, COVID and what changes that's driven in terms of businesses and their working from home in particular. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. We look forward to seeing the results next year from a lot of our diffusion tubes and monitoring stations.
Good.
Thanks, Kelly, for a useful update. I think for me, this builds on the LLR inequalities framework that we've just talked about, and I know we've just had a discussion around, you know, what we as in organisations across the table and as ICS partners can do. And I think for me, air quality is a really important area where we can consider what we as individual employers can do in supporting our staff around this. So I suppose it's just building on Kelly's point around what support we as a public health team can do in terms of supporting you as organisations to how you can address this agenda, and just building on Kelly's offer really. So yeah, just thinking about how we can build that, and I'm sure Kelly and I know her colleague Jenna will be as supportive as people would like to in terms of how we can progress that forward.
Mark, please.
Yeah, thanks to Paper Kelly. It's really interesting, and I think UHL can support this. You've probably, whilst you've been on air just now, got a message from our Director of Estates and Facilities who's keen to work with you on some of this. A bit of breaking news just in. We have, as you probably know, the hospital hoppers. They're the buses that go around the various hospitals just dropping people off and picking people up. They are being electrified. So that will hopefully reduce particulates and emissions in and around the Royal, the Glenfield and the General. As you know, we're reconfiguring the hospitals. Air quality emissions is part of the planning on that, necessarily so. And I'd remind colleagues, but especially Kelly, we've got the Institute for Lung Health at the Glenfield Hospital. So half a mile up the road from here is one of the premier institutions for lung health, and they are consistently talking to trust management around how we go greener in all ways in order to improve outcomes for people with COPD, asthma, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think we can partner you on this.
Thank you. Very positive. Sarah.
Yeah, I wonder, not for now, but as we develop over the next few months, whether we need to look at the impact that health has on air quality in terms of the number of journeys and all of those sorts of things that people make to and from health facilities, and what we're going to do about that over the next few years. I think that's really important. We need to link that into this work. Some of that will, you know, we can do things like virtual appointments, and I know that's not suitable for everybody, but that will impact on it. Some of the work we're doing around the reconfiguration. So I do think that, you know, we're equally a part of this agenda than the local authorities and district councils. So I think we can add something to this.
Thank you. Any other comments? So we're asked to note, hang on, of course, asked to note the progress to date in delivering the Air Quality and Health Action Plan, and also request that health partners within LLR further consider how their organisations can improve air quality. Happy to have that go through. Thank you. Item 13, Leicestershire Children and Families Partnership Plan Progress Update, pages 135 to 140. Marla Razak, Children and Families Partnership Manager, has joined us to present the update, I believe.
I think you might have me, Chair.
I apologise, Kelly, then, thank you.
Sorry. Excellent, thank you. So hopefully everyone's had the chance to read the paper. It was just to provide an update on the 5 different actions and where they are to date and where they're going in the future. So the first action is around ensuring children have the best start in life. So they're particularly looking at what the pandemic has had on school readiness and looking to put communication plans in place and share key messages about the importance of accessing preschool places and actually what school ready means. So that's been sent out to children that are about to start school. They've also delivered a workshop for health and midwifery staffs because, as I'm sure everyone is aware, the first 1,001 critical days are key to ensuring children have a good start to life. So there's been workshops around what that means locally. They've also looked at developing a universal health offer for 2-year-olds for those that are at risk of any development delays. So that's what they've done since we last came. So I think we come annually to update on this. And then the second priority is all around keeping children safe and free from harm. So there is a group called the Child Criminal Exploitation Group, and they've been looking at how they can embed the child sexual exploitation nurse and how that might open a free-flowing bit more information between organisations. Again, they've produced a communications and training plan around Operation Compass, and they're looking to pilot that before it gets rolled out across the whole of the county. They've also been doing some work around county lines, and in particular going into schools to talk about county lines and how to report any concerns. So sorry, the Violence Reduction Unit has been doing that. And then priority 3 was around how we support children and families to be resilient. So in particular, looking at the early help work. So all these actions have been reviewed. They've put new actions in place, and you can see what they are in the report, but around governance and leadership, data, systems and processes, how developing the workforce, and how we engage the communities. So they've looked at all the data that's available across partners and tried to pull together a data set to look at early help in particular. They've been working with schools to look at what the current systems are in place. And as the report says, this has been piloted in Hinckley schools, a dedicated phone line. So if any school has a concern about a child, then hopefully they've just got one number to call. The next priority is around vulnerable families, ensuring they're receiving personalised and integrated support. So the new team has been set up around assessment and resource team, and that team is there to provide sort of like a therapeutic service. And now regular panels are in place, so there's like the process to consider all referrals. They've been doing some work around those at risk of homelessness, so those 16 and 17-year-olds, and they've audited a bundle of cases to draw recommendations from, and that work will be completed by September. There's ongoing work to agree a protocol with CAMS to try and ensure that care leavers have that service available to them until they're 25. And they're reviewing the pathway from adults, from teenagers to adults, sorry, through the Defining Children Services work. And priority 5 is around children's good mental and physical health. So again, all of these priorities have been reviewed. We are looking at embedding the trauma-informed practice work, again, through the Strategic Partnership Board, working really closely with the VRN on what that looks like for LLR. We've done a bit of a deep dive into breastfeeding initiation to understand which areas of the county breastfeeding initiation is worse, and try to understand the causes of that, and then try to address them. We've been working with the CCG around emergency admissions for under 18s and how if we might prevent some of those. So obviously there's a bit around demand management, but then also whether we can prevent people coming to A&E if they don't need to in the first place. Doing some work around food and nutrition, looking at food poverty and the holiday hunger programme, but then also looking at maternal and childhood obesity. Again, working with the CCG on both of those, and also to looking at improving perinatal mental health and trying to stop women smoking in pregnancy. So from a trauma-informed perspective, we've had a workshop with schools, so that was pretty well received, and Leicestershire and Rutland Sport are working with partners to coordinate the holiday activities and food programme. So that's what we've done to date, and then in the next 6 months the plan will be refreshed. We're looking again to do a bit of a comms plan, because during COVID a lot of those younger children actually haven't been accessing early years provision, so those that are particularly targeting those that are eligible for the 2-year free education. There's a multi-agency group set up to look at what additional support might be needed for those children that were either born during the COVID pandemic or under 5 and therefore potentially miss some of their health assessments, and how we identify any delays or concerns that might be have been missed because of that. Again, there's an LLR group set up to look at how we might share the early help assessment between all partners, so we're just completing one form rather than multiple, and there is an action plan in place for trauma-informed practice, again working with the BRN, and they have just, I think this is common knowledge, just commissioned the Wave Trust to help us implement that plan basically. Any questions?
Andy, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this is such an important area, isn't it? And it's great to see all the actions that are going on. There's some really good stuff there. This picking up the conversation from earlier, this area to me cries out quantification, you know, for some facts and figures and numbers as well as the narrative. And it would be really great to kind of get more of a sense of, you know, particularly, for example, on something like the first 1,000 days of life, we know how important that is. So how many children in the county have, you know, a great first 1,000 days in life? How many don't? Is that some way to quantify or graduate it? Does that vary by geography, by ethnicity, by other socio-demographic demographics, and so, you know, can we hone in and start targeting on that? So I think this is such an important area, that this update is great, but I really would like to kind of see us start to get the numbers as well, and to see if we can set ourselves some goals and track trajectories in these areas.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go on, Kelly.
No, I didn't know if you wanted me to respond. So I'm more than happy to take that back as an action to the Children and People's Partnership of how we demonstrate impact and understand actually what the need is across the county. I can do that.
I think it would be very helpful to have figures. Jeffrey Kaufman.
Chair, thank you for the presentation. This may be a local ODB problem, but I guess it may be county-wide. Barely a month goes by when our planning committee, our planning department, doesn't have an application for a children's home somewhere in the borough. Now, my understanding is more and more children in care, quite rightly, are finishing up with foster parents and not taken into care. My further inquiries seem to indicate that because Leicestershire is a fairly low cost property area, many children are being put in children's homes, particularly from local authorities in London and the South East, where opening a children's home can be twice the price as here. And my concern is the number of children that are being boarded away from home in children's homes. Now, I understand some have to be taken out of a situation and taken away from it, but who is, I understand that the local authority placing them are responsible for them, but do we have any idea of what is happening in this area with regards to residential homes for children? The county council I know of are just going through a couple of their own, but there seems, I don't want to use the word plague, but there seems to be more going up than local children would need. And I perceive a problem in the future with this private enterprise children's home business. So do we have any numbers? Does somebody report to us to Leicestershire, if a child in care is in the county? Do we have any register of them other than as a planning authority, a district council having to give usually cases for change of use? And I just wondered whether this ought not to be kept an eye on sometime in the future.
I think that there will be, because all looked after children are under our care, aren't they? But I don't know the numbers. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in children's services, but through our joint safeguarding boards, etc., I do know that children who are placed in this area have to be reported to the local authority, because obviously the local authority will have safeguarding responsibility wherever children come from here. So I do know that children who are placed in this area, who are looked after by other local authorities, we will have a register of. So I'm sure Jane Moore would be able to let us know how many children are resident in this area that aren't our responsibility.
Is that okay? Okay. Anybody else? Christine, sorry.
Yeah, I picked up on the under priority 5 about to reduce the 8 accident and emergency attendance. Do we know if the reason that the attendance has gone up is because people can't get in to see a doctor, so therefore they go to the A&E to get looked at, because sometimes you need to see a doctor and it's no good doing it over the telephone. You know, sometimes you need to show what's wrong with you. And I just wondered whether or not that question's asked.
Andy?
Yeah, it is actually. We've been particularly in light of the recent spikes we've seen. We've had some of the most incredibly busy days in A&E we've seen, well, ever really. And there has been work looking with people attending for the reasons behind their attendance, and difficulty in accessing primary care, or perceived, you know, sometimes even the perception it's going to be difficult, is one of the factors that causes people to seek support through A&E. There seems to be a particular issue around children as well, and we are developing, I think, what's been recognised as a really good plan actually for responding to particularly respiratory illness in children and young people. So that will help, and that's a partnership piece of work. But it's definitely an issue. I think at the moment the entire NHS primary care A&E is running really, really hot, and people are just trying to find support and access where they can. Numbers in 111 are up as well, so everything's up. But I'm sure it's part of the factor. Yeah, I couldn't particularly attribute a specific number to it, but it definitely comes up in the feedback we get from patients.
I would think as well, with the pandemic, people with children are more worried about what it might be developing into as well.
Yeah, there have been some the regulations that primary care are working under regarding safe management of infection prevention and control tend to exacerbate that a little, actually. But in fairness, there does seem to be a bit of an asymmetry between primary and secondary care, because secondary care, of course, have to deal with the same issues. So we are looking at that and supporting colleagues in primary care to try and make sure we can continue to offer services to children that are effective.
Yes, yeah.
You won't let me. Can I come back, Chair? Are we really concentrating on and discussing with doctors then, because I think it is an ongoing issue, not just in my area but around the county. But I do have a lot of residents come to me and say, they can't get the phone, they'll ring up at 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock when they get through and there's no appointments. And in some cases, it really is that they need to see a doctor. And I'm just wondering, are we doing anything about that?
Absolutely. So there's an enormous amount of work underway. And in fact, it's been the subject of detailed presentations, as you know, to the council. We're doing three things. We're looking at why it's happening. We're putting in place an immediate response, and then we're thinking about how we put in place a medium to longer term response, because the reason we think some of these problems are occurring is a combination of latent demand that's now emerging after a period of COVID, coupled with a sort of self-fulfilling pressure, because as more people seek support, the system's ability to respond slows down, which creates even more demand. So, instead of people ringing once and not getting through, they're ringing 20, 30 times. Everyone's ringing 20, so all of a sudden the kind of phone lines are absolutely overwhelmed. So there's a kind of vicious circle we're trying to break into. The short-term responses have centered particularly on explaining, engaging with patients, putting in place additional service options, particularly alternatives. So we've scaled up 111, we've scaled up the primary care presence at A&E, we've scaled up pharmacy alternatives, we've put digital options in to primary care, we've increased the phone infrastructure so that the phone lines themselves are more modern, better able to cope. We've actually increased the staffing numbers in primary care where we can, although it's not always possible to recruit quickly. All of those things help, but the fundamental problem, we think, is that we've got too much of a choke point around access to primary care. And there are ways we can probably offer a better service if we help people to genuinely get the best out of the systems that we offer. So at the moment, we're treating the entire population in the same way, regardless of whether they're working age adults seeking a one-off appointment with a doctor, or an elderly person who regularly needs to see a specific doctor, or a parent worried about a child. They all get the same offer, and they all reach into that choke point that's the general practice. So we're saying, look, actually, we need to differentiate this. It's a bit like having one queue in a supermarket, whether you're buying food or clothes, everyone goes to the same counter. We've got to try and split that up a bit and help people to make a much better use of the systems we're offering. So we think that's going to take a little bit of time, but in the short term, we're doing absolutely everything we can to respond. It's particularly difficult at the moment, and so we're not being defensive. We absolutely get it's not acceptable, but we're absolutely flat out on it, doing all we can. So it's a really difficult time. Must be very, very difficult for patients at the moment, but we are genuinely trying to address it as fast as we can.
Do you have any knowledge of how many telephone conversations with the doctors go to having to go down to the surgery? Because I know on all mine personally, I've ended up going down to the surgery, so it's then 2 appointments being taken up by one patient rather than the one. So I just wondered how that is impacting on your system.
So telephone triage or total triage is quite an effective way of trying to stream, and also the role of people that we would have previously regarded as receptionists is changing. They're not just receptionists now, they are being trained additionally to try and sign people to the correct service. So, maybe they can go straight to a nurse or straight to a pharmacist. They don't need to see the GP first. So it might look like those are additional steps in the journey, and sometimes they are. Of course, you will get a call from a GP who says, actually, I do need to see you, come in. But it on balance, it probably does help to kind of connect people up to the right service first time. So it's constantly reviewed. We're looking at it. We're still learning a little bit about how these things work. But it's all part of trying to stop everybody just metaphorically sitting in a waiting room waiting to see a GP, when in fact there are loads and loads of people we could move to services that would meet their needs more quickly if we can just get a kind of a conversation with them initially. So I can understand it might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it does help us to try and kind of stream people into services more efficiently.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd agree with everything that Andy says. I mean, the CCG has been working incredibly hard with partners to try and develop the offer to patients, and we absolutely recognise that patients are struggling to get in to see primary care, but there is a huge amount of other things that can be done. And one of the ways that we have been working, because of national guidance, which has actually recently starting to change, and we're helping practices to understand that. It's about the infection control protocols to prevent further infections, particularly of patients as they come in. We don't want that. Certainly don't want any staff to become infected, who would be the ones actually treating the patient. So that there's a lot of those considerations. I think the public have been extremely helpful at the beginning of COVID. They listened to what was asked and they've stayed away. But there is a huge amount of demand, and I think all practices understand that and are working incredibly hard, not just in Leicestershire but also in Leicester City and in Rutland, to try and meet those demands. And it has to be a number of different ways that we can actually meet that demand. It will have to be a bit of telephone because that might be appropriate for some people. It might need to be face-to-face. And practices are working out what works best for their patients. It does seem slightly counterintuitive, as you say, of having that two patient contact, but that's probably more efficient if you can see 20 people and only have to see then 5 of those that absolutely need seeing. But the CCG are absolutely working on that. And just this morning, we were talking about how we can increase capacity, how we can get practices into that better place to seeing as many people as possible, to avoid patients turning up at A&E and putting pressure on our colleagues in UHL unnecessarily. There's certainly a big view that we should be seeing more people face to face, but we need to be doing it in a safe way. And all of the things that Andy has talked about, we are doing, and we are pushing as hard as we can. And we thank the patients and the public for understanding where we are, and just bear with us, we are working as hard as we can.
Thanks for the clarification. Dr. Hanlon.
Just to give some idea of numbers, certainly most practices look at this, and we convert about 50% of our telephone triage into face-to-face contacts. I've been doing that through the course of the pandemic. But one of the mitigations of that is that, again, most practices then bring that person in to see the doctor who's already triaged the call. So that saves time during the consultation.
Okay, so we're now being asked to note the progress and delivery of the Children and Families Partnership Plan 2018 to 2021. Are we all okay with that? Yes, thank you. Item 14 now concerns the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, and it's on pages 141 to 144. And Josh Namaji, the Public Health Consultant, has joined us to provide an update on the Act, which was introduced earlier this year, and also the recommissioning of the Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse Service across LLR. Thank you, Josh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as you've already noted, that this is to provide an update on both the DA Act and the recommissioning work. So in terms of the DA Act, the report provides a lot of detail on what it seeks to do. It was signed into law earlier this year, and some of the key elements of the detail that is in the report are around petition and accompanying guidance around domestic abuse on a statutory footing. So this is around capturing the different abusive behaviours. So this is not just physical, but elements like financial and emotional abuse as well. And also to ensure that children that are witnesses of domestic abuse are supported as victims in their own right, and therefore receiving more tailored support to meet their needs. So in terms of the Act and what it means for us, it places a duty on Tier 1 local authorities to provide accommodation-based support to victims of domestic abuse and their children, and to provide safe accommodation, and also to work as part of a system-wide approach, particularly involving Tier 2 local authorities. So this is through setting up a LLR Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board. And one of the requirements is that we are required to conduct a strategic needs assessment to assess the need for accommodation locally across Leicestershire, ensure that that meets the needs of all of our victims. And so to help achieve the work that we're going to be doing, a lot of our partnership organisations will receive a request for some information and data to support the needs assessment. So really a plea to ensure that the information is released to us swiftly to enable us to progress the work. The findings from the strategic needs assessment will then inform our Leicestershire-wide domestic abuse strategy, which will then support us to inform on commissioning and decommissioning decisions. That strategy has to be in place by October. It's a requirement from MHCLG. To conduct this work, MHCLG have provided funding. So Leicestershire County Council has received £1.1 million, which sits within the Children and Family Services where the community safety teams sit. And each district has received approximately £33,000. We're hoping that the funding will continue beyond a year, but at the moment, the funding commitment is for 1 year. In terms of what we've done locally so far, so we've set up a Domestic Abuse Act and funding group to support the response from the Domestic Abuse Act. So that's attended by district representatives, Children and Family Services, Adult Social Care, Public Health, the police, and also service providers. And while this needs assessment is being conducted, we have already identified some gaps. So this includes things like therapeutic support for victims and also for the children, the need for dispersed accommodation, and also needs around supporting those with substance misuse, with mental health and learning disabilities, and also support for older victims of domestic abuse. Another area, another gap is around accessible housing, and particularly for those with disabilities. And also a request was put in to consider having domestic abuse accommodation support officers within each district. So the work around putting the proposals in place as a result of the DA Act is very much in its infancy stages, so we will provide a further update as the work progresses. And then in terms of the recommissioning of domestic abuse and sexual violence services, we have a service that's currently provided by UAVA, and that's a consortium of 3 organisations. The contract for this service is due to end on the 31st of March 2022. And Public Health also commissions Women's Aid Leicestershire to provide support to female victims of domestic abuse that are currently residing in a refuge. The commissioning partners for this, as well as Leicestershire County Council, we've got the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, Leicester City Council and Rutland County Council. So as part of this recommissioning work, we held a series of workshops, stakeholder workshops back in 2019 to help us develop the draft proposal. We then went out to consultation on the draft proposal, which has then helped us to inform the final proposal. So this new model, which has already gone out to tender, includes an LLR-wide helpline and engagement service. So that will be the front door into the service for victims, for their families, for the general public, and also for professionals. A domestic abuse locality service, for which there'll be a service for county and Rutland residents and a service for city residents. An LLR-wide sexual violence service. Both this one and the domestic abuse locality service provide more tailored support and specialist support around domestic abuse and sexual violence. And the model also includes accommodation related support services. So there'll be a contract for the county and a contract for the city, and then a perpetrator intervention service. So our funding envelope for Leicestershire County Council is just short of £386,000 per annum. The tenders for these are still live, but they will be closing within the next week, with contract award expected at the end of October, and the new service operational from the 1st of April 2022 onwards. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshna. Any comments? So we're asked to note the work being undertaken by partners in response to the recent introduced Domestic Abuse Act 2021, including the development of a strategic needs assessment to assess the needs of accommodation-based domestic abuse support across Leicestershire, and to note the update concerning the recommissioning of domestic and sexual violence and abuse service across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I do apologise, Simon. I didn't notice.
No, not at all. No, and apologies, Chair, for not being able to be there in person to deputise for Rupert Matthews today. I was intending to be there, but unfortunately had to self-isolate at the last minute. So apologies for that. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to just make a bit of reference to at the end of point 21 in Joshna's report. There just mentions that we're working with the city around the perpetrator interventions. I just wanted to reassure the board that we are also on a separate piece of a separate project working with the county and district as well as CCGs and probation around perpetrator interventions for the county. It's kind of on slightly different timescales. So that provision, which has been partly locally funded and partly funded by the Home Office, ends 6 months into these initial contracts. And so that perpetrator work that we're doing with the city, as referenced in the report, is actually setting up a framework contract, which is slightly different than the other contracts, so that will enable us either as a PCC or collectively, hopefully with other funders across the county to continue perpetrator provision within the county as well. So just wanted to kind of assure the board of that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Sorry I missed you.
No, not at all.
Yes, Sarah.
Just wanted to ask a quick question, actually. Given the fact that a lot of this planning was done in 2019 before the pandemic, have we reviewed case numbers as a result of the pandemic to see whether there's a pattern of increase or not?
Yeah, we as part of the contract management, we always review the figures anyway on a regular basis. So we have seen an increase in light of the lockdown and the pandemic. I think the service itself doesn't specifically need to change. What we have got more of is more around the digital offer as well. So it's not just the face-to-face provision, but for those that feel that they don't feel safe attending services or not comfortable attending services, we're able to provide more of a suite of options in terms of that communication. But yeah, it doesn't change the service proposal, but we have seen an increase in those reporting domestic abuse.
Thank you.
Okay, no one else? Thank you. So are we happy to note that that work? You don't need me to read it out again, do you? All right. Okay, thank you. So item 15, transforming care for those with learning disabilities and or autism, pages 145 to 200. This report presents to the Health and Wellbeing Board an update concerning the current activity and progress of the LLR Transforming Care Design Group to improve outcomes for service users with a learning disability and or autism. David Williams, Director of Strategy and Business Development, LPT, and Heather Pick, an Assistant Director within the Adults and Communities Department, will present the report. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. Oh, sorry, go on, Heather.
Sorry, David, I was just going to give some of the context and then hand over to you for more detail as you're closer to the operational, if that's all right.
By all means.
I don't think any of us would have escaped the Transforming Care programme and the horrors of Winterbourne View. I just wanted to remind people that this May was the 10th anniversary year of that Panorama programme. It seems to us working in the field very live, but 10 years seems quite a long time ago, and hopefully we'll be able to say today in Leicestershire what significant changes that we've had. The Transforming Care cohort are a small number of people in the grand scheme of things, but the Transforming Care impact and outcomes for individuals towards more independent living are huge. The impact for organisations who are held to account for performance and trajectories and the costs of accommodation and care and support in order to keep people safe and well are a real long-term investment, not just around the funding, but also around the resources and the individuals that we will need to support. There are no short-term fixes for the Transforming Care programme, but we want to be able to assure the board that work is in progress for Leicestershire and celebrate the achievements that we've made during the last 12 months. The Transforming Care programme for us consists of 3 key areas. One is the LEADER programme, which is learning from premature deaths of people with learning disability, and making sure that we can put in place improved practice as part of that learning. It involves the annual health checks, which are done throughout the county by GPs and GP practices, and really key checks that pick up health issues for people with learning disability that may not ordinarily be picked up from general practice, etc. And we've seen the importance of those health checks and the reviews of those health checks bringing in better outcomes for people with learning disability. And another key area from the Transforming Care is our discharge from long stay hospitals, which was around the Winterbourne View tragedies and the learning from that. We've attached to the report the LEADER annual report so that we can get an update, and also the Transforming Care annual report. And you'll also see attached the 3-year roadmap, which has been signed off and well received by NHS England, which denotes the travel and the journey that we want to achieve over the next 3 years, and the funding that has been awarded to Leicestershire to help us do that. So if that's okay, I'll hand over to David for a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Heather. Much appreciated. I think just to add, I think there's a lot of examples in this item that you've been talking through today about ways of working and ways of going things. So Heather and I work as a joint senior responsible owner. So we've developed this together with the NHS and local authorities responding and supporting people. So that's worked really well. And I mean, Heather's just touched there on the real importance of how we support a vulnerable group. And I just wanted to reinforce that if we get things right for those with learning disabilities, we will also be getting things right for other vulnerable groups and supporting them. So the summary then on the LEADER review, so the learning from deaths, and these are the learning from people who have died in LLR who have been identified as having a learning disability. And people do die at an earlier age in LLR because they have a learning disability, which might make things like healthcare, prevention, social care, looking after them more difficult to provide. And the LEADER report picks up and looks at what the actions and the opportunities are. So that's shared inside the pack. Drawing your attention, I suppose, to page 147 of your pack, I just wanted to say that the learning is useful, but actually it's the implementing and the development of the good practice which is going to make a real big difference. So we have a checklist there that we're sharing with everybody from health and social care about the things to consider when you're working with somebody with a learning disability in order to make sure that we reduce any further early deaths for those with a learning disability. So I think that's there. And I thought I'd just touch very briefly on the second document that we shared with you, which Heather flagged as being that 3-year roadmap. And the things we're really working on now are focusing on making sure you get the right care in the community. So people with a learning disability are supported and enabled to live in our communities, to take part in our society and our life, and that we're reducing those numbers of people who are in hospital. The other bit we're working a lot on is that joint working. So it kind of starts at the top of the joint working of Heather and I bringing the NHS and local authority together, but we're cascading that down so that we've got NHS staff, social workers, housing providers and others all coming together. And we've added and combined that. We're getting even more engagement from service users and their carers, because that's going to make a really big influence on how we develop the work. So we brought the reports here for you today to hopefully share a lot of the info that's going on and to pick up those recommendations, Chair, that you started with at the beginning of this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Vivian?
Thanks, Heather and David. Really interesting report and useful report, and great to see, you know, the work that's already happening and will continue to happen. just a couple of things for me. One of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was looking through this was the fact that healthy life expectancy for this population is actually lower than the national average, which actually buckles the trend for Leicestershire, because Leicestershire as a whole on our life expectancy is higher than the national average. So I suppose really it was just whether we can do some little bit more work around unpicking some of that, and also thinking around how we can link some of the public health prevention services that we actually deliver to support this agenda. So thinking around, I know in year 2 you talk about an early intervention and training approach to support wellbeing, and thinking around how we can embed some of the principles of the making every contact count plus approach into that and having those healthy conversations. So more than happy to support in terms of if there's anything we can do around that. But then also thinking around how we really consider this population when we're thinking about some of the public health prevention services. I'm thinking around like weight management and access to sexual health services and all those sort of things, because I think that might be something that we might be able to work a bit more collectively to support, because I really am thinking around how we can think around that wider prevention agenda really, so that we can help support these individuals have, you know, a longer and healthier life expectancy.
Thank you. Do you want me to respond? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. So absolutely, I would completely agree and really happy that we all work with you. I was just going to very, very briefly touch on the fact that the prevention and screening work, I think, is incredibly important. And one of the successes that we've had through COVID has been having dedicated learning disability clinics. And the advantage that's done is that's provided longer appointments, that's enabled people to come with their carers, and we've been supporting people to get their vaccination. That will continue on into life because people are now becoming more confident about having their vaccines. So that makes flu vaccines easy as we go through time and how we develop things. So I think there's real opportunities about how we build in screening and other work, because it will make a difference to life expectancy and support and healthy years for this population.
Thank you. I think it would be good if we follow up on that, Viv, because it's my first time at one of these meetings, but the way I'm hearing it, everybody is willing to work in partnership on these things. And so, you know, the more we can get done, the best. Christine.
Yes, can I just say, with the lead for adult social care at County, I'm pleased to read this report. I'm pleased to see what that section of the department is doing. It's right, we've got rather a big department, so I'm guessing it's still trying to get my head around everything. So yes, it is interesting, and like the chairman said, come back with more information, and certainly I shall ask for stuff to come to the lead members meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. So we're asked to note the Learning from Deaths of People with Learning Disability Review Programme annual report. And we also asked to note the Transforming Care in Leicestershire and Rutland 3-year roadmap. Is all in agreement? Thank you. Now we move on to item 16, the Framework for Integrated Personal Care, pages 201 to 234. This report seeks the board's approval for the framework for integrated personalised care, which is intended to supersede the health and social care protocol. We're going over now to Faye Bayliss, Deputy Director of Integration and Transformation, LLR CCGs, and Heather Pick, also an Assistant Director within the Adults and Communities Department. Who's starting this time?
Is it okay if I just put some context, Faye? So I haven't been overly involved in the last iteration of the review, but you'll be sad or glad to know that I was involved in the 1998 original health and social care protocol design, system design, and it was very much then a leader in its time, and looking at how we could work better together, health and social care, back in the day, to be able to provide that on the ground care for people, and to stop some of the duplication around multiple professionals turning up at people's door to provide similar or the same types of care. So not dissimilar to where we are now, and some of us have been around too long, but anyway, happy then that we had a review of that in 2014, and again still the same principles, and happy to hear the principles of the ICSs are still carrying forward individualised care plans, etc., and looking at how we can work well together. And that health and social care protocol has been held in good stead and has held us all really together during that period. But as lots of things needs to move on and be modernised. And what we looked at in 2014 was building on that delegation of healthcare tasks and social care intervention, a training programme for our colleagues in care and health around looking at proper training and oversight and governance of some of those delegated tasks. The tasks that we perform now are the same, but very much more complex, I think, than back in the day of 1998. And I think the boundary between health and social care has become quite blurred, and it's right for us to have another look. And Faye and colleagues of mine within adult social care took up the mantle again in 2019 to look at modernising and rejuvenating the joint arrangement that we'd had between us. And today's paper presents the results of that review and is very much a system-wide approach at looking at not only the training and the governance, but really joint commissioning of those services, so that we can have the best interventions that we can across the system, and that we're not vying for each other's pots of money or resources, etc., but really looking at how we can best promote that joint working. And it's been mentioned before at this meeting around what will it look like for the people who are receiving this, and that's very much been the focus of this review. What will it look like for the person who's receiving this care and support, and does it make a difference to them whether it's a healthcare professional or a social care professional who's delivering that support? And we think not, as long as the support is right and that they get it in a timely manner, and that supports them in their lifestyle choices. So I'll hand over to Faye to give you more detail of the actual review and the outcomes of that that you've got detailed in your report. Thank you, Faye.
Thanks, Heather. That was a really good summary of where we are. And really just to build on that, I want to emphasise that this is absolutely built on the principles of personalisation. So the NHS England produced some guidance around 1920 January, and they produced this model of personalisation, and this underpins everything that we're doing. So it is about improving outcomes and experiences for our service users and patients, and it's about really building a package of care that supports them. The health and social care protocol, as Heather has described, has been around in the system for a long time, and it sort of almost arbitrarily towards the end identified tasks as being health or social care. But often when we look at patients, in fact, always when we look at patients holistically, we can't start to categorise, well, is a behavioural need health or social cares to pay for? And it started to become quite divisive and drive some unhelpful debates around funding. So this is why really we wanted to say, actually, let's just look at the person holistically, what are their needs, and then work collectively together to design the sorts of support that they need. So really helpful that we've also followed the TCP agenda item, because it's all related really. It's about personalisation and doing what matters most for our patients and citizens. So it has been about 18 months of work in the making. We've worked closely with partners across LLR, and collectively we started with the management guidance, which really talked about the principles for integration and decision making, and then we went on to develop some practical guidance with some case studies to set those examples to help our workforce to make those constructive, or have those constructive conversations at MDT level, so that we can better support them to make consistent decisions. So we're in the process now of getting it signed off as the way we do things in LLR. City Council have signed it off, and it's going to Rutland's Health and Wellbeing Board in a couple of months' time. So really, I just want to bring this to this board now to have the conversation and hopefully get your support to embed this as our new framework for personalisation in Leicestershire County. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye and Heather. Anyone want feedback, comment, Vivian?
Thanks, Faye and Heather. There's a line in this report that I really liked, and it was, if you're there and you're competent to perform the task, then do it. And I thought that was really, I really like that in terms of what we're trying to get to in terms of a partnership approach. Obviously appreciating you've got the right framework and governance to make sure that that is safe. But I just think that's a really nice principle to start thinking around in terms of our wider integration work. And just one thing that I wanted to pick up on specifically from a prevention point of view was you talk about the making every contact count approach within the framework and within the training, but I just wanted to sort of explore how well embedded that is, because I think this is a really key workforce in terms of thinking around what they can add from a prevention agenda and to potentially help stop those secondary conditions developing or those secondary admissions. So it's really just to see around if there's a way we can link together to support the training element of that, and if there's any way that we could make that a sort of a mandatory element in that, or just basically to explore that a little bit more. I'd be really keen for that conversation.
Thank you. I'm sure the Faye and Heather will be happy to do that.
Do you want me to take that one, Heather? So I'd just say to start with that, absolutely, we want to work with you. This is about making every contact count. And one of the fundamental principles of this framework is to promote independence. We really want to support people to live as independently as possible in their own homes for as long as possible. And that the make every contact count principle in this context is about signposting carer support, or, you know, really support people to live independently. So we don't want it to be about the provision solely of formal health and social care services. This is about community resilience and family support. So very happy to work with you on that, Viv. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're asked to just to approve the framework for integrated personal care. So we're happy to approve? Yes, thank you. Item number 17, the Health and Wellbeing Board Annual Report 2020 to 2021, which is pages 225 to 264. So I believe Jo is going to present this. Thank you.
Key achievements along with a look ahead. We've taken feedback from previous editions, and with the use of infographics and design have hopefully made an engaging read. Mrs. Richardson, thank you.
Sorry, I can't see you, Jo. Does anyone have any feedback on this one? So we're asked to note the progress that's been made during the period 2020 to 2021 and approve the Health and Wellbeing Board Annual Report for publication. Are you all okay? Thank you. It's approved, Jo. Item number 18, we have the Health Watch Annual Report 2020 to 2021. So we'll go over to Mukesh, please, for his report.
Thank you, Chair. I think everybody will agree that it's been an unprecedented year last year and going into this year. And one of the things that we found is that health inequalities has been brought to the fore, and that's potentially a good thing, that we've been able to identify certain groups, certain issues that might have been underlying in previous years. So that's really positive. And I think it's captured quite well in the statement from Sir Robert Francis, that Health Watch provides an opportunity for all of us to listen, to hear the experiences of those people facing inequalities and understand the steps that could be taken to improve people's lives. So that's the context of the work that Health Watch does. And for those that have read the reports, it's very much about Health Watch listening to people's voices, articulating the issues, identifying the facts, and enabling those voices to be portrayed through research to relevant service designers and planners so that informed choices can be made. It's been difficult to say the least, because I would say that probably about 80% of our work is outreach work. And obviously the lockdown has impacted on how we engage with people in a live manner. And whilst we adapt to new ways of working, digital exclusion also means that there's a challenge of people who may not have equipment, modern technology, or people who are not confident and familiar because of age or where they live, to be able to get the bandwidth to be able to participate. So it has been difficult, but we maintained our operations through remote working and adapted. And we also had the same issues. You know, we were not used to Zoom meetings and Microsoft Teams and everything else. And there was a kind of a disparity between professionals working with Teams and Zoom and members of the public using WhatsApp and Facebook and social media. So that was a good learning experience in terms of the challenges. So I'd like to congratulate the board and the staff and volunteers that we have, and also our stakeholders for persevering and carrying on with providing that service. And I will be the first one to admit that, you know, we did get a major hit in terms of staff turnover, and I had to take the management reins at short notice and try to get things back on track. So if we've not been able to provide 100%, my sincere apologies. We worked collaboratively with the CCG, as Andy highlighted earlier on. Some really positive work came out of that. We're also working collaboratively with Health Watch Rutland and other voluntary and community sector partners. We recognise that we have a bit more work to do with the challenges of engaging people in the county, districts and the boroughs because of geography. But we do have plans in place to get that better. One of the things that I want to do is to see a better working relationship with the health and wellbeing boards and also local elected members, but also non-health related facilities like libraries and museums, pharmacies, you know, other areas where the public go. And in that context, one of the projects that we did last year when the pandemic kicked in was a conversation about how do we reach marginalised communities. And the conversation in the engagement leads group was very much about translations, which is a traditional approach to reaching some marginalised communities. And I kind of felt, well, you know, we're at a stage now where we've got the broad range of disabilities, where there's different approaches to reasonable adjustments, but also in terms of ethnic minorities, there are 7, 8 generations or more who don't read and write their own languages, and they speak them, but, you know, English is the first language, so would translations work? So the dialogue shifted towards, you know, identifying a solution. And one thing that we proposed was using video messages where the messenger is as important as a message. So if I give some context around that, if we were doing something around International Women's Week and we had a male presenter on the video, it wouldn't have the same connectivity and relevance. And likewise with some of the BME groups or Black and minority ethnic groups, having a presenter from their own background would enable those people to connect with what the message or the video was saying. So I congratulate CCG in the work that was done thereafter, and that really made a difference. And I can say that other areas in the UK, including the governments, have taken that on board and have started using video messaging. We have looked at the impact of COVID-19 and continue to do so, and have provided advice on issues of vaccine hesitancy, people's influence in terms of family members or somebody in the community who says, well, no, don't worry about that, it'll be fine. And certainly when I walked the job in the initial phases of the pandemic, the messages were not getting through, despite the local authority banners on the lampposts and, shopkeepers letting people in without masks, no social distancing. Whereas now I can see a real difference. People are, sort of behaving in a more responsible manner. So the report captures some of the work that we've done, we've had over 1,300 responses to a COVID-19 survey. De Montfort University have been very interested in the work that we've been doing through our BME Connect project, which is looking at more effective communications and about whether those traditional concepts work or not. And so I will be contributing to the De Montfort University Global Masters course on how communications are held with diverse communities across the world in terms of global health. And also we're working potentially with Oxford University in the near future for a survey on the impact or the experience of people that have had COVID-19 in their families and survived. We worked with Leicester Hospitals in terms of carrying out a desktop review of the discharge lounge at Leicester Royal Infirmary, and that was a really good piece of work that influenced some changes there. Obviously, there's still some more work to be done, and one of the things that we're doing now as Healthwatch is going back to previous reports and seeing what difference and what impact has been made, as opposed to just having a one-off report which highlights an issue but then not following up on that. So the annual reports highlight some feedback from members of staff, and there's a remarkable shift from various services where waiting times, customer service, focus on medication as opposed to dignity and respect and individual patient choice was the case. In terms of feedback from people, we did a indicative survey for CAMHS, looking at mental health services, and although we would have preferred a longer timescale to do that piece of work, we were able to go to the Valentine Centre and other service providers and talk to people in the waiting areas and get some feedback. We learned a lot through that in terms of designing the surveys, so that if we're targeting children, young people, that the design of those surveys need to be done in a relevant way with images and design concepts relevant to that group. Because I'm sure with health services, we sometimes forget the people that we're targeting. So we have that formal sort of surveys, and sometimes the questions are too long. So like with everybody else, we're learning at the same time. I feel that we're beginning to identify areas of improvement, which will make a long-term change in terms of partnership and collaborative work. And again, I would stress that Healthwatch Leicester and Leicestershire would be really keen to work with everybody here, including elected members, because you also get feedback from your constituents. So we'd like to hear more of that, and maybe have a quarterly or half-yearly meetings with elected members to hear from them what they feel should be the priorities, as well as the Health and Wellbeing Board, in terms of special projects that we undertake. Going on in terms of the impact of our work, I mentioned special projects. We've been looking at mental health. And there are some dedicated reports that we have been working on. One is which focuses on the mental health impact on armed forces veterans, and whether there is adequate information for veterans when they leave the services, and whether the armed forces themselves have the links with civilian society in terms of where those veterans can go for support. That piece of work was hit by the pandemic, and we were not able to reach as many armed forces veterans as we would have liked. But we did connect with paid staff from local authority and service providers in the health sector. So for me, it wasn't ideal because I would have liked to have talked to the veterans themselves. But we are continuing that work. And looking at some of the issues, not just for the veterans themselves, but also for their family members and friends. There's another piece of work around mental health, which is the generic area of mental health. And we were getting feedback that people were not aware of the landscape, where to go for support. If people identified mental health issues, either themselves or within their family, and in particular within some communities, they just didn't have an awareness of what was on offer. So what we found was that at least 50% of the respondents would go to their GP as a first point of contact for mental health advice. And in some cases, their feedback sort of said that the GPs were not the right person in terms of having that expert knowledge around mental health issues, or indeed whether they knew where to signpost. So, some basic things that can be improved. Partnership and collaborative work with voluntary organisations, charities, and maybe a campaign-based approach rather than one-off activity might make a difference in that regard. And that's going, before we even talk about, reasonable adjustments in terms of, British Sign Language or flyers and information in different languages. We have had a tremendous amount of success working with community radio stations. So Leicester Community Radio, Radio Sierra, and others have been involved and continue to be involved in the work that we're doing. And a special mention to Dr. Rob Watson, who runs an organisation called Decentered, where community members are invited to talk about issues like COVID-19. So it's using new media and new technology to reach in the community. So where are we going in terms of future direction? We are looking at areas such as male suicides. They seem to be higher than the female counterparts. And we're looking at homelessness and rough sleepers and what their access is to primary care. We are also looking at access to dentistry, which is a national issue that Healthwatch England have also identified. And during the pandemic, we were getting so many phone calls from people saying that they couldn't get a dental appointment. But then the dentist would say, well, if you want to pay for it, you can have a private appointment tomorrow. So lots of concerns there. Access to GPs is an ongoing issue. And again, we'd like to hear both perspectives from the GPs themselves as well as the public in terms of, is the issue about access to GPs, or is it about the customer service and the reception in the surgery, or indeed the changes as a result of the pandemic in terms of new models of care? So we're working with Healthwatch Rutland to do monthly themed engagement activities to be able to identify different issues throughout the year. And again, we openly invite anybody to come along to those online sessions, and we will now try to look at other alternatives to do live engagement as well. So just to finish off, social isolation and loneliness, personal health budgets we're also looking at as light touch areas. I hope that you've had a chance to read the reports, and like Joe mentioned earlier on, we have taken that approach where we've used graphics and key headlines that stand out to make the report a bit more digestible and accessible for people in the public who may not be used to jargon. So I shall stop there, but if you want me to go into any further details, I'll take questions. Thank you.
Does anyone have any comments? John?
Yeah, not a comment, just an offer really. From a district perspective, very happy to engage when's appropriate for you. Obviously, capacity will be an issue, but we do have a district health leads meeting where all the districts come together.
Fantastic.
So that may be one way of kind of easing that engagement burden. But yeah, very happy to engage when you're ready.
That is so good to hear, and thank you for that. And that's the kind of, I think, for the Health and Wellbeing Board, as we were talking earlier on about the approach for ICS, is this is the sort of thing that would really help us, because we have a common purpose to support the public, and through collaborative working, communication, we can enhance what we do and make the outcomes, and be able to collect that evidence of what is the difference that we're making. Thank you.
Vivian?
Thank you. And I think your report just highlights the importance of getting that local voice, isn't it, through everything that we do, and really looking at how we can develop more of that co-development approach. So I suppose it's just building on some of the discussions that we've had today, really keen to work with you to think around how we can link up the work that you're doing into the joint health and wellbeing strategy and the ongoing health and wellbeing communication and engagement plan, because it'd be great to get the sort of priorities aligned so that we're supporting each other and really making sure that your insight is filtering into the priorities of the board.
Thank you.
We're asked to note that report. Is everyone okay? Thank you. Oh, no. Okay, that's all right. Yeah, it's fine. Finally, on item 19, the housing services update. So we're going to John Richardson from Blaby, Director of Blaby District Council, to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I will be brief as it is a report for noting, but I do want to pull out some items within the report. So just running through 5 or 6 quick items. Homelessness figures, we're closely monitoring those across the districts. There has been a recent rise in new cases, which anecdotally we feel may be linked to the lifting of the embargo on evictions. So we're closely monitoring that figure, and we'll report back on that at future meetings. In terms of temporary accommodation, the use of that is slowly reducing, which is good news and a positive trend. But clearly we just don't have enough affordable housing, in the county and the districts to cope with the demand. But we are working very closely with our social providers. There has been a reduction in private rented sector, and that is a concern. And, again, it just comes back to amount of properties available, and the teams are working, extremely hard with all sectors to try and place people, appropriately. I will just mention briefly the prison release protocol. That's something that our housing officers are working on collaboratively with City. colleagues as well. It's particularly important with the opening of the Category C prison in Glenparva in 2023, ensuring that we've got pre-release plans in place specifically around housing, and that early engagement with prisoners is critical to that. So a great piece of work that's developing there, which should make life easier for all concerned, including the prisoners on release. So we're quite excited about that coming forward and being adopted. The hoarding pilot, that's due to start soon, and we've recruited now to staff and the team to deliver that. And that's going to add new capacity into the system, and that will hopefully lead to better join up, improved pathways and better outcomes for residents on the back of that. So again, that's being led by Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council, but again, we're excited to see the outcome of that and the impact that will have on residents. Similarly, the assistive technology pilot, the technology enabled care work, that's now been agreed, and we'll be looking to integrate that into our housing MOTs. And again, that has got significant potential for residents going forward, and how we can use that to streamline the systems, make efficiencies, but more importantly, keep people in their houses longer for their well-being. So again, we'll report back on that in future meetings. And then the final item just to mention really is the kind of success, I think, of the housing enablement team, and the fact that they've dealt with a third more cases in the past year, and significant workload there through the pandemic. Those 16 months have put a real strain on hospitals and getting people out and back into homes and accommodation quickly through the work of that team, and that increasing caseload that they've had to deal with. So very pleased with that, and I think it has been valued by LPT partners, the work that team has done. So yeah, just a nod to them for their work. So I'll leave it there and happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody? Yes, Heather.
Not so much a question, John, because we work very closely together as partners. And I would say the Lightbulb programme is one example of where partnership working really does make a difference, and a difference to the people who are using that. And we are victims of our own success, really, because it was always the intention to increase the footfall of people at the early stages of intervention and reduce the dependency on more expensive, longer term interventions. And we really have done that. And that has increased our waiting lists, etc. But we're working on that, and that's not a bad outcome of the Lightbulb programme. So just a thanks to partners for investment and making that work. We have a lot of investment in adult social care in that. We have occupational therapy staff who are dedicated to the Lightbulb programme and work alongside the technicians and housing support officers to make that work. But as I say, victims of our own success, but in a good way. Thank you, John.
Quite agree. It's a brilliant scheme. So, Christine.
Can I just say that the hoarding team does work, because there was a lady who fell over and the fire brigade had to go in and couldn't pick her up because they couldn't get in, basically, and it was sorted pretty quickly. And I think she's been all right since. But yes, the firemen couldn't get in because of how much stuff she was hoarding. So it does work.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just paragraph 13 about assistive technology. This is particularly of interest for me. I think I picked up in the integration executive actually about technology that's going into homes. And actually, health is trying to put more technology into homes to keep people safe. And just a question, have we thought about how we can integrate that so actually we spend once and get twice the amount of effort out of it?
I think that's been the theme for the day, hasn't it? Working better together and more collaboratively. So absolutely, we'll follow that up offline and we'll have a conversation, see how we can ensure that we're joined up on that approach.
Well, if we even do half the actions that have been spoken about today, we'll be there most of the way there, won't we? That's really good to hear. Thank you. Anyone want to respond to John's? No. So we're just asked to note the update. Okay, thank you. The date of the next meeting, the boards meet on Thursday, the 25th of November at 2 o'clock. We'll also be having a development session in September, which will further consider the refresh of the joint health and wellbeing strategy, and invitations will be sent out soon. I haven't any other items that are to be taken as urgent. So that concludes the meeting. Thank you all for attending, and thanks for making my first visit here very rewarding. Thank you.